I calmly asked my daughter not to smoke because of my health. My son-in-law snapped, "Shut up, you stink worse than smoke," and slapped me. His wife smirked. I said nothing. Then I made one call the next morning. His life was ruined. My name is Isaiah Jefferson, and at 75 years old I taught them a lesson. Money cannot buy, but it certainly can enforce. Before I tell you how I brought an empire down on their heads, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is non-negotiable. I was sitting in the dark. The only light came from the green LED display of my oxygen machine. It clicked rhythmically like a clock counting down the seconds of my patience. My chest felt like it was filled with wet cement. I know that feeling well. I spent 40 years pouring concrete into the foundations of the biggest skyscrapers in Atlanta. I breathed in dust and grit and fumes so my daughter Keisha could breathe air-conditioned luxury. Now I have COPD, my lungs are scar tissue, and regret. But tonight, the air in my basement room was not just stale, it was toxic. Thick blue smoke drifted through the ceiling vents. It smelled of expensive cigars and cheap vanity. Upstairs, my daughter Keisha and her husband Braden were hosting another one of their parties. They called this room the guest suite when they moved me in a year ago, but let us call it what it is, a basement, a storage unit for an old man they are waiting to bury. I coughed a dry, hacking cough that rattled my ribs and made my vision blur. I reached for my inhaler on the nightstand. My hand shook slightly, not from age, but from a deep burning anger. I had asked them 3 times this week, "Please smoke outside, just the patio, just 10 feet away." Is that too much to ask? Of the man whose pension pays the electric bill? Apparently, it was the laughter from upstairs filtered down through the floorboards. High-pitched fake laughter, the kind people make when they are trying to impress someone they secretly hate or fear. I looked at the framed photo of my late wife Beatrice on the nightstand. She was the only reason I was here living in this indignity. I promised her on her deathbed that I would look after Keisha, that I would ensure our daughter was safe. But looking at the water-stained ceiling while secondhand smoke filled my failing lungs, I realized that protecting my daughter had turned into poisoning myself. I stood up. My knees popped and groaned. I grabbed my cane. It is a simple wooden cane, scuffed and worn, not the custom titanium one I could easily afford. They think I am poor. They think I am just old. Ice Jefferson, the retired construction worker living on Social Security checks and memories. They have no idea that the concrete foundation this very house sits on uses a stress distribution technology I patented in 1985, a patent that has earned me more money than Braden could spend in 10 lifetimes. But tonight, I was not a billionaire in hiding. I was just an old man who wanted to breathe. I walked to the stairs, 13 steps, each one a mountain. When your lungs are operating at 40% capacity, I climbed slowly, one hand on the rail, one hand on the cane, 1, 2, 3. I could hear Braden's voice booming above the jazz music. He was bragging again, probably about a real estate deal he had not closed, or money he did not actually have. I opened the door to the main hallway. The blast of central air conditioning hit me first, followed instantly by a thick cloud of cigar smoke. The living room looked like a magazine cover, white leather sofas that cost more than my first truck, crystal chandeliers dripping with light, and about 20 people standing around holding crystal glasses. They were Braden's crowd, young, ambitious, and completely hollow, wearing suits that were too tight and smiles that were too wide. I stood in the doorway for a moment, leaning on my cane, trying to catch my breath. No one noticed me. At first, I was just part of the background, a shadow in the corner, a piece of old furniture that did not match the decor. Then I saw Keisha. She was wearing a red dress that was cut low and tight. She held a long, thin cigarette in one hand and a glass of expensive red wine in the other. She looked beautiful. She looked like her mother, but her eyes were empty, glazed over with the intoxication of this fake lifestyle. She was laughing at something a man in a blue suit was saying, throwing her head back in a way that looked rehearsed. I stepped forward. My cane tapped sharply against the polished marble floor. A few heads turned. The conversation died down slowly, rippling outward from where I stood like a machine running out of fuel. Silence spread across the room. Braden turned around. He was holding a thick cigar between his fingers. He looked at me with that familiar mix of annoyance and embarrassment. He did not introduce me. He never does to his friends. I am just the charity case, living downstairs, the burden he is too saintly to kick out. I ignored him and looked straight at my daughter Keisha. I said. My voice was raspy, but it carried across the quiet room. I cannot breathe down there. The smoke is coming through the vents. Please, baby, just take it to the patio. It was a polite request. It was the request of a father asking for mercy, not demanding respect. I saw a flash of guilt in Keisha's eyes. Just for a second, she lowered her cigarette. She looked at the glass doors leading to the massive deck, a deck I paid for with a check Braden told everyone was a bonus from his job. "Oh, Daddy," she started to say. Her voice was soft, and for a moment I thought she was going to do the right thing. I thought she was going to remember who wiped her tears when she fell off her bike, who sat up with her when she had the flu. But then she looked at Braden. She checked his reaction before she checked her own conscience, and the guilt in her eyes vanished, replaced by fear and submission. Braden stepped between us. He is a big man, not strong in the way a man who works with his hands is strong, but heavy with soft indulgence, manicured nails, and a face flushed with expensive scotch. He loomed over me, exhaling a cloud of gray smoke directly into my face. I coughed. I could not help it. My body convulsed, and I had to lean hard on my cane to stay upright. The guests watched in awkward silence. Some looked away, examining their shoes, but most watched with morbid curiosity. Like drivers passing a car wreck. "Are you serious right now?" Braden asked. His voice was low but venomous, dripping with contempt. "You are going to interrupt my party. You are going to embarrass me in front of my investors because you have a little cough." "It is not a cough, Braden," I wheezed, trying to stand tall. "It is my lungs. I just need clean air." "You need clean air," he mocked loudly, playing to the audience. Now he laughed, a short barking sound, and a few of his sycophants laughed with him, nervous titters that fueled his ego. "You know what pollutes the air in this house, Ice, you do. You smell like old medicine and poverty. You are stinking up my investment walking around here in those rags looking like a janitor." I gripped my cane tighter. My knuckles turned white. "Listen to me, son," I began, but he did not let me finish. He snapped the veneer of the civilized businessman, cracked, and the bully underneath came out. "Shut up," he roared. "Just shut up, you ungrateful old leech. You are living in my house, you are eating my food, you are breathing my air. If I want to smoke, I will smoke. If I want to burn this house down, I will burn it down. And you will say, 'Thank you for the heat.'" He was shouting now, spit flying from his mouth, his face contorted with rage. I looked at Keisha. I waited for her to step in. I waited for her to say, "That is my father Braden. Stop. He raised you when you had nothing, but she did nothing." She took a sip of her wine and looked at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. That silence hurt more than the smoke. It cut deeper than any insult. I looked back at Braden. I looked him dead in the eye. I have stared down union bosses, corrupt inspectors, and structural failures. I do not fear a man who wears loafers without socks. You do not own this house? "Braden," I said calmly, my voice steady, despite the wheezing. "Technically the bank owns it and I pay the mortgage. That was the trigger." His face turned a deep, violent purple. The truth is a dangerous weapon to use against a narcissist, especially in front of an audience. He swung his hand. It happened fast, but in slow motion for me. His palm connected with my cheek. A sharp cracking sound echoed through the silent room. My head snapped to the side. My glasses slid down my nose. I stumbled back, but I did not fall. I caught myself on the cane, planting it firmly on the marble. The room gasped. Someone dropped a glass and it shattered, sending shards across the floor. I tasted blood in my mouth, metallic and warm. I touched my lip. I looked at my hand. Blood. He had slapped me. My son-in-law had slapped me in front of 30 people. Braden looked shocked for a second, as if he surprised himself, but then he saw the fear in the guest's eyes and he doubled down to assert dominance. "Get out of my sight," he hissed. "Go back to your hole before I throw you out on the street myself." I looked at Keisha one last time. She was not looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at me, and then she did the unforgivable. She smirked, a tiny cold smirk that said, "You deserved that," a smirk that sided with the abuser against the protector. That smirk broke the last chain, holding me to my promise. It broke the vow of poverty I had taken to teach them humility. I straightened my jacket. I adjusted my glasses. I did not shout. I did not fight back. I simply nodded. "Understood," I said. I turned around and walked back to the stairs. The silence followed me all the way down. I entered my basement room and locked the door. The music upstairs started again, louder this time. as if to drown out the memory of what had just happened. I wiped the blood from my lip with a tissue. My hand was steady now. The shaking had stopped. Sadness had been replaced by cold calculation. I reached under my bed and pulled out an old battered trunk. Braden thought it was full of junk, old clothes, sentimental trash. He was wrong. Inside, lined with velvet, was a satellite phone and a heavy titanium seal with the crest of Jefferson Holdings. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I had not called in 10 years. A voice answered on the first ring, clear and alert, despite the late hour. "Mr. Jefferson, is that you?" "Yes, Luther," I said. My voice was as cold as the concrete I used to pour. "Kicking start the Omega Protocol. I want everything back. The house, the cars, the accounts, freeze it all tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. I want them destroyed." "Understood, sir," Luther replied without hesitation. "It will be done. Consider it handled." I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of the bed. I listened to the footsteps upstairs, the dancing, the celebration of my humiliation. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was defeated, but they forgot one thing. You never slap the man who built the floor you are standing on because he knows exactly which beam to pull to make the whole world collapse. I sat on the edge of the sagging twin mattress in the darkness, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the throb of my own heartbeat in my swollen cheek. The metallic taste of blood was still fresh in my mouth, but it was the silence that hurt the most. Upstairs, the party was dying down. The heavy bass of the music had faded into the murmur of departing guests and the clinking of bottles being thrown into the recycling bin. I looked at the framed photograph of Beatrice on the nightstand. Her smile was frozen in time, captured on a sunny day in 1992, back when my hands were strong and my lungs were clear, back before the concrete dust had turned my chest into a graveyard. I picked up the photo, my fingers tracing the glass over her face. "Beatrice, my love," I whispered into the stale air of the basement. Tried. I really tried. I kept the promise she had made me swear on her deathbed 5 years ago. "Do not give them the world." "Ice," she had said, her voice weak but her eyes fierce. "Let them build their own ladders. If you give them everything they will value nothing. Let them struggle a little. Let them find their own strength." She was a wise woman, but she had a blind spot when it came to our daughter, Keisha. Beatrice believed that struggle built character. She believed that if we hid our wealth, if we lived like the working-class people we started out as, our daughter would learn humility. She would learn to love us for who we were, not for the empire I had built in the shadows of the Atlanta skyline. So I buried the truth. I buried the patents. I buried the millions. I buried the fact that I was the majority shareholder of the largest infrastructure firm in the state. I played the role of the retired laborer living on a fixed income, chipping in my Social Security check for groceries, fixing the leaky faucets with my own tools, making myself small so they could feel big, but sitting there with a bruised face and a broken heart. I realized that Beatrice was wrong. Struggle had not taught them humility, it had taught them cruelty. It had not made them strong, it had made them predatory. They did not look at me and see a father who had sacrificed. They saw a resource that had run dry, a battery that was out of juice, and now that I was inconvenient, they were ready to throw me in the trash. The promise was broken the moment Braden's hand connected with my face. Respect is the currency of family, and they were bankrupt. I closed my eyes and let the grief wash over me, not for myself, but for the daughter I had lost. She had stood there and smirked. That smirk was the blade that severed the last tie, the last obligation I had to protect her from the reality of the world she wanted to live, in a jungle where the strong eat the weak. Fine, I thought, opening my eyes, I will show her who the lion really is. Suddenly the door to my room shook on its hinges, a violent kick that sent dust motes dancing in the beam of my oxygen machine display. I did not flinch. I did not stand up. I just watched as the handle turned and the door swung open, slamming against the concrete wall. Braden stood there silhouetted by the light from the hallway. He had loosened his tie, and his expensive suit jacket was stained with wine. He swayed slightly, holding a bottle of champagne by the neck, like a club. He looked at me with eyes that were glassy with alcohol and contempt. "Well, look at you," he sneered, stepping into the room and filling the small space with the smell of arrogance and stale sweat, sitting in the dark like a rat. "Are you pouting, Ice? Are you crying because I put you in your place?" I said nothing. Silence is a weapon. I learned that in the boardroom. Long before I retired, silence makes weak men nervous. Braden stepped closer. looming over me, trying to use his size to intimidate a man who had stared down. Bulldozers. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, crumpling it into a ball. He threw it at me. It hit my chest and fell onto the floor. I did not reach for it, I just looked at him. "Read it, old man." Braden barked, his voice slurring slightly. "That is your eviction notice, handwritten and legally binding. As far as I am concerned, you have 24 hours. 24 hours to pack your rags, your pills, and that noisy machine and get the hell out of my house." I looked at the crumpled paper on the floor, then back at him. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Braden," I asked, my voice calm, rasping like sandpaper on wood. "I have nowhere else." Braden laughed, a cruel barking sound that bounced off the concrete walls. "Oh, do not worry, I am not a monster. I made a call. A friend of mine runs a facility, a state-funded place called Shady Pines. It is perfect for you, Ice. It smells like boiled cabbage and urine, and they have a bed with your name on it. You will fit right in with the other forgotten relics." Felt a cold fire ignite in my belly. Shady Pines. I knew the place. It was a warehouse for the dying, a place where they sedated the elderly to keep them quiet and changed the sheets once a week. He was not just kicking me out, he was sentencing me to a slow, lonely death, all while living in the house my money had paid for. "And do not look at me like that." Braden continued pacing the small room, kicking my shoes out of his way like they were trash. "You should be thanking me. Tomorrow is the biggest day of my life. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I am signing the deal of the century. I am acquiring a controlling interest in a massive construction firm, Jefferson Holdings. Maybe you have heard of it. You used to pour concrete, didn't you? Well, I am going to own the guys who bossed you around. I am going to be the CEO, the king of the hill, and I cannot have a senile old man dragging down my image. I need this house to be a palace, not a nursing home. So you are out, Ice, you are expired. Inventory." He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and sour. "Enjoy your last night in a real bed, old man. Tomorrow you sleep on a cot. Tomorrow I am rich and you are nothing." He straightened up, took a swig from the champagne bottle, and turned his back on me. He walked out, leaving the door wide open, laughing to himself as he climbed the stairs back to his world of delusion. I waited until I heard his heavy footsteps fade down the hall. I waited until I heard the bedroom door slam upstairs. I waited until the house was silent again. Then I moved. I did not move like an old man. I moved like a man with a mission. I reached under the bed and dragged out the old steamer trunk. Braden had laughed at it once, called it my coffin. He thought it was filled with old work clothes and sentimental junk. He never tried to open it because the lock looked rusted shut. It was not rust. It was a biometric scanner disguised as decay. I pressed my thumb against the cold metal plate. There was a soft click, and the latches sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid. The smell of oiled leather and high-quality paper wafted up, replacing the stench of the damp basement. Inside there were no rags. There were no old tools nestled in custom-cut velvet foam. Lay the instruments of my true life, a satellite phone secure and untraceable, a heavy titanium seal with the crest of the Jefferson family, a lion holding a steel beam, and a thick leather-bound ledger containing the codes to accounts that Braden could not even imagine accounts in Zurich, in the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. I ran my hand over the cool metal of the seal. I had not touched these things in 10 years. I had walked away from the power because I wanted peace, because Beatrice wanted a simple life, but peace was no longer an option. Braden had declared war. He just did not know he was fighting a nuclear power with a water pistol. He thought he was taking over Jefferson Holdings tomorrow. He thought he was buying out some faceless board of directors. He had no idea that Jefferson stood for Isaiah Jefferson. He had no idea that the man he had just slapped, the man he was evicting, was the founder, the majority shareholder, and the only person on earth with the power to veto his entire existence. I picked up the satellite phone. It felt heavy and familiar in my hand like a hammer. I dialed a number that was not in any phone book. It rang once. Then a voice answered, sharp and alert despite the hour. "Mr. Jefferson," the voice said. It was Luther, my personal attorney, and the only man who knew exactly where I had been hiding for the past decade. "Luther," I said, my voice steady and cold as the steel I used to build bridges. "I am activating the Omega Protocol." Luther paused for a beat. Silence on the line, then the sound of a chair shifting as he sat up straighter. Sir, the Omega Protocol, that is the scorched earth option, that is the total dismantling of assets. Are you sure? I looked at the crumpled eviction notice on the floor. I looked at the bloodstain on my sleeve. I remembered the smirk on my daughter's face. I have never been more sure in my life, I replied. Braden Miller thinks he is buying my company tomorrow morning. He thinks he is putting me in a home. I want you to be there, Luther. I want you to be in that boardroom when he walks in. I want you to freeze his assets. I want you to revoke his security clearance. I want you to foreclose on this house and Luther. I want his car repossessed before he even gets to the highway. Leave him with nothing. Strip him down to the bone. Do you understand me? Luther's voice came back crisp and professional. Understood, sir. I will mobilize the team immediately. We will have the paperwork ready by 6 a.m. And Mr. Jefferson. Yes, Luther. Welcome back, sir. I ended the call and placed the phone back in its cradle. I did not close the trunk. I sat there in the dim light looking at the titanium seal tomorrow morning. Braden Miller would walk into a lion's den thinking he was the tamer. He would realize too late that the old man in the basement was the one holding the keys to the cage. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The pain in my chest eased, the throbbing in my cheek became a dull ache. I was not Ice the victim anymore. I was Isaiah Jefferson the Titan, and tomorrow the ground was going to shake. I was awake long before the sun touched the horizon, sitting in the same chair where I had spent the night watching the digital numbers on my oxygen machine flip over one by one. I was not tired. Adrenaline is a powerful fuel, even for a man of 75. And today was going to be a day written in the history books of my family. The house was quiet for a few hours, a heavy, uneasy silence that hung in the air like smoke. But I knew it would not last. I knew exactly what time the storm would hit because I was the one who had set the barometer at 6:30 on the dot. The violence returned just as I expected. A heavy boot slammed against my door, shaking the frame and sending a fine dust of plaster drifting down from the ceiling. Get up, old man! Braden's voice boomed from the hallway, muffled by the wood but sharp with malice. Rise and shine, the garbage truck is coming at noon, and I want you and your junk on the curb before. Then, I did not answer. I did not move. I just listened to him breathing heavily on the other side of the door, psyching himself up for his big day. I knew exactly what he was wearing without even opening the door. He would be in his navy blue Italian suit, the one that cost $5,000, the one he charged to a company credit card. He thought no one checked. He would be wearing the gold watch I gave him for his wedding, the one he told his friends he bought himself after closing a big deal. He was dressed like a king, but he was standing in a house of cards that was already on fire. He just could not smell the smoke. Yet, I heard him pacing the hallway, his leather soles clicking on the hardwood floor. He was rehearsing his speech. I could hear him muttering to himself, confidence, dominance. Vision he was preparing to walk into the boardroom of Jefferson Holdings and claim the throne he thought he had won. It has always amused me in a dark way. How Braden never made the connection. He has worked for Jefferson Holdings for 5 years. He has climbed the ladder, stepping on necks and cutting corners, desperate to reach the top. Yet he never once stopped to think about the name on the building. Jefferson is a common name. He told me once at a Thanksgiving dinner while carving the turkey. I bought it as a dime a dozen name. Ice like Smith or Jones implies no history, no legacy. He said it to my face, the founder of the company, the man whose name was etched in granite in the lobby. He thought it was a coincidence. He thought I was just some old laborer named Jefferson who happened to be his father-in-law. He never dug deeper. He never looked at the founding documents. He never realized that the signature on his paychecks matched the signature on his marriage license. Arrogance is a blinder, and Braden was legally blind. I heard Keisha's voice join him in the hallway, soft and submissive. "Honey, do you want breakfast?" she asked, trying to be the good wife, trying to smooth over the tension from last night. "No time," Braden snapped, and I could hear the rustle of fabric as he brushed past her. "I am meeting with the board at 9. Today is the day, babe. By lunchtime, I will be the CEO of the biggest infrastructure firm in the Southeast, and the first thing I am going to do is fire the old guard, clean house, starting with those dinosaurs in accounting. They were not dinosaurs. They were my friends. Men I had hired 30 years ago. Men who had discovered Braden's embezzlement weeks ago and had been waiting for my signal to act. Go, make sure your father is packing," Braden barked. "I do not want to see his face when I get home tonight. Tell him if he is not gone, I will drag him out myself. I heard the front door open and close, slamming with the weight of his ego. I stood up, then moving slowly, not because of pain, but because I wanted to watch. I walked to the small basement window that looked out onto the driveway. It was a ground-level view, the perfect angle to see the fall of a man who thought he could fly. The morning light was gray and thin, illuminating the driveway where Braden's pride and joy sat parked a brand-new Porsche, Panamera jet black, shining with wax. He leased it 6 months ago, using a bonus he had not technically earned. Yet, he loved that car more than he loved my daughter. He spent more time polishing it than he did talking to his wife. I watched him walk out of the house. He looked like $1 million, chest out, chin up, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. He stopped for a moment to admire his reflection in the car window, adjusting his tie, smoothing his hair. He was the picture of success, a man on top of the world. He pulled the key fob from his pocket and pressed the unlock button. Usually the car would chirp, the lights would flash, and the mirrors would unfold in a welcoming, mechanical dance. Today, nothing happened. Silence. Braden pressed the button again. Harder this time. Frowning, he took a step closer and pressed it repeatedly. Click, click, click. Nothing. The car sat there like a 2-ton paperweight, dark and unresponsive. I saw the confusion cloud his face. He muttered something angry, probably blaming the battery. He pulled the manual key out of the fob and inserted it into the door lock. He turned it and pulled the handle. The door opened, but the alarm did not sound. The interior lights did not come on. It was dead. He threw his briefcase onto the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. I could see him through the windshield, framing him like a portrait of desperation. He inserted the key into the ignition and turned it. Nothing. No roar of the engine, no hum of electronics. Just the silence of a dead machine. He slammed his hands against the steering wheel, mouthing curses. He tried again and again, turning the key with increasing violence, as if he could force the engine to life through sheer willpower. Then the dashboard screen flickered to life. It was the only thing working in the car. A bright blue light that illuminated his angry face. I knew exactly what it said because I had authorized the message 10 minutes ago via my satellite phone asset repossessed contact lender, immediately authorized by Jefferson Holdings' legal department. I saw Braden stare at the screen, his eyes widening. He did not understand. He could not process it. He thought it was a glitch, a computer error. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen, dialing the dealership. I could see him shouting into the phone, his face turning red, screaming at some poor receptionist, demanding to speak to the manager, telling them who he was, telling them he was the future CEO of Jefferson Holdings, but no one was answering. Luther had seen to that. The dealership had been instructed to direct all calls from his number to a deadline. He was screaming into the void. He threw the phone onto the passenger seat and ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up. Panic was starting to set in. He looked at his watch. It was 7:15. He had a meeting that would define his career, and he was stranded in his own driveway with a car that had been turned into a brick. He grabbed his phone again, tapping furiously. He was opening the Uber app. I watched him waiting for the next domino to fall. He tapped the screen, requesting a ride, a black car. Obviously, he would never ride in anything less. I saw him wait, watching the screen, and then I saw the flinch. The notification popped up. Payment method. Declined. Please update. Payment information. He stared at the phone as if it had bitten him. He tried another card, swiping through his digital wallet, swiping frantically. Declined, declined, declined. Luther had been thorough at 8 a.m. sharp. Every credit card, every bank account, every line of credit associated with Braden Miller had been frozen, flagged for suspicious activity, and locked down by the bank's fraud department. He was a man with a $5,000 suit and $0 to his name. He tried again, his thumbs hitting the screen so hard I thought the glass would break. He was sweating now, dark patches forming under the arms of his expensive jacket. The cool composure of the CEO was gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a cornered animal. He screamed a sound of pure frustration that penetrated the glass of the car and reached me in the basement. He kicked the dashboard, leaving a scuff mark on the leather. He grabbed his briefcase and scrambled out of the car, slamming the door so hard the whole vehicle rocked. He ran back toward the house, not walking like a king anymore, but running like a thief. He burst through the front door and I heard him thundering down the hallway, screaming for my daughter. Keisha! Keisha! Where is your purse? I moved from the window to the door of my room, pressing my ear against the wood. I heard them. In the kitchen upstairs, Braden's voice was high-pitched, hysterical. "What is wrong?" Keisha asked, her voice trembling. "Is the car broken?" "Give me cash," Braden yelled, cutting her off. "I need cash now. The car is dead. The app is not working. The bank system is down. I need cash for a taxi right now." "Braden, you are scaring me. What is happening? Shut up and give me the money," he roared. I heard the sound of a purse being upended, contents spilling onto the floor. Coins, keys, lipstick, and then the rustle of bills. "I got $40, Keisha said, her voice small. "That is all I have. Give it to me." He snatched it from her. I heard his heavy breathing. He did not say thank you. He did not kiss her goodbye. He just turned and ran. I went back to the window just in time to see him sprinting down the driveway, his tie flapping over his shoulder, his briefcase banging against his leg. He looked ridiculous. A man in a fortune of clothing running for a taxi, like a common commuter clutching two $20 bills in his fist as if they were life preservers. He reached the end of the driveway and looked left and right, desperate for a ride, desperate to escape the disaster that was unfolding around him. But he could not outrun this. He was running toward the office, thinking he could salvage the day, thinking he could still sign the deal. He did not know that he was running toward a guillotine, and I was the one holding the rope. I watched him disappear around the corner, and then I turned away from the window. I walked over to the closet and pulled out the garment bag I had hidden in the back inside. Was my own suit, a charcoal gray three-piece tailored on Savile Row 20 years ago, timeless and commanding. I ran my hand over the fabric. It was time to get dressed. It was time to go to work. Braden was heading to the office to be crowned king. I was heading there to remind him that gods do not bow to peasants. I could see it in my mind as clearly as if I were sitting next to him in the back seat of that smelling yellow taxi. Braden Miller was currently experiencing the longest ride of his life. He was huddled in the back of a car that smelled of stale pine air freshener and other people's sweat, clutching his briefcase to his chest like a shield against the poverty. He so despised he was checking his watch every 30 seconds, tapping his foot incessantly against the floor mat, watching the minutes tick away and calculating just how late he would be for his coronation. The taxi was stuck in the morning gridlock of Atlanta traffic, a river of red taillights that stretched for miles, mocking his urgency. He pulled out his phone again, his thumb hovering over the banking app he needed to transfer funds. He needed to move money from our joint savings account to his personal checking just in case he needed to grease a palm or buy a new suit before the meeting. He tapped the screen. The Face ID scanned his sweaty features and the app loaded the little spinning wheel, turning and turning. Then the notification popped up. It was not a green check mark. It was a red banner that stretched across the top of the screen. Account frozen due to suspicious activity. Please contact the fraud department immediately. Braden stared at it, blinking. His brain refused to accept the data. It was a glitch. He told himself it had to be a glitch. Bank systems go down all the time, especially with these mobile apps. He swiped the app closed and reopened it. Trying again. Same result. Account frozen. He tried his credit card. App account suspended, contact issuer. He tried his investment portfolio app. Access denied. User locked out. Panic began to rise in his throat like bile, tasting of acid and fear. He was not just broke, he was digitally erased. He yelled at the driver to drive faster, to find a side street, to do something other than sit in this sea of metal. But the driver just ignored him, turning up the radio. Braden slumped back, hitting the seat with his fist. He told himself it was a mistake, a clerical error caused by the massive transfer of ownership that was supposed to happen today. Maybe the system was just preparing for his new status as CEO. Yes, that had to be it. The system was rebooting for his arrival. He clung to that lie because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. He did not know that the only system that was rebooting was the one that controlled his destruction, and I had just pressed the enter key. Back in the basement, the air was still and cool. I stood before the small cracked mirror hanging on the back of the closet door, looking at the man reflected there for 10 years. I had looked in mirrors and seen ice. The retired laborer. I had seen gray stubble, tired eyes and shoulders slumped under the weight of a promise to a dead wife. I had worn flannel shirts and denim jeans stained with grease and paint. I had let people look through me. I had let them speak over me. But today, ice was gone. The man looking back at me now was Isaiah Jefferson, and he had not aged a day since he left the boardroom. His eyes were eyes, sharp, cold, and hard as flint. His shoulders were square, holding up the weight of the silk and wool with an ease that only comes from wearing power, like a second skin. I buttoned the vest of my charcoal gray three-piece suit. It was a bespoke creation cut by a tailor in London who only accepts clients by referral. It fit me perfectly. Hugging my ribcage without restricting my breath, the fabric was soft but substantial. A fortress of thread, I fastened the cufflinks, gold knots that Beatrice had given me for our 30th anniversary. They caught the dim light of the basement bulb, flashing a warning. I tied my tie, a Windsor knot, precise and symmetrical, tight against my collar. I reached for the shoe polish and a rag sitting on the edge of the bed, polishing my black Oxford shoes until they shone like obsidian mirrors. Finally, I picked up my cane. Not the scuffed wooden stick I used to hobble around the kitchen, but a new one I had kept hidden in the garment bag. It was made of polished ebony with a heavy silver handle shaped like the head of a lion. It was not a medical device, it was a scepter. I took one last look at the room, the peeling paint, the water stains, the narrow bed where I had spent restless nights listening to my daughter and her husband laugh at my expense. I would not miss this place. I would not miss the smell of damp earth and neglect. I turned off the oxygen machine. The silence that followed was heavy and final. I did not need it right now. My rage was oxygen enough. I unlocked the door and stepped out into the hallway. The floorboards creaked under my weight, but they sounded different today. They did not groan in protest. They snapped to attention. I walked toward the stairs, the silver tip of my cane striking the wood with a rhythmic thud. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, ascending from the underworld, rising to the surface. I opened the door to the kitchen. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the mess Braden had left behind, coffee grounds spilled on. The counter dirty dishes in the sink, the contents of Keisha's purse scattered across the floor. Keisha was on her knees, sobbing softly, trying to gather her things. Lipstick keys, crumpled receipts. She looked small and broken, stripped of her arrogance by her husband's cruelty. She heard my cane tap against the tile and she froze. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and sniffled, keeping her head down. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am sorry about the mess. Braden was just stressed. He didn't mean to yell. He is just under a lot of pressure today." She was still defending him, still making excuses for the man who had treated her like an ATM machine just minutes ago. It was pathetic and it broke my heart, but I could not stop. Now mercy is for after the war is won, not during the first battle. "Look at me, Keisha," I said, my voice deep and resonant, filling the kitchen. She slowly lifted her head, expecting to see the old man in the stained cardigan, expecting to see the father she could pity and ignore. But when her eyes met mine, her breath hitched in her throat. She blinked, confused, as if her brain could not process the image in front of her. She saw the suit. She saw the silk tie. She saw the gold cufflinks and the polished shoes. But more than that, she saw the posture. She saw the man who stood 6'2" and took up space. She saw the father she had not seen since she was a little girl. The man who used to command construction sites and silence rooms with a look. "Daddy," she stammered, pushing herself up from the floor, getting to her feet unsteadily. "Why are you dressed like that? Where did you get those clothes you look like?" She trailed off, unable to find the words to describe the transformation. "You look expensive," she wanted to say. "You look powerful," she wanted to say, but the words died on her lips because they contradicted everything she thought she knew about me. I did not answer her. I simply walked past her, the scent of my cologne, a blend of sandalwood and old leather trailing. Behind me, I walked to the front door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch into the bright morning light. The air was fresh and cool, free of smoke, free of lies. I took a deep breath, my lungs expanding fully for the first time in years. I looked down the driveway past the dead Porsche that sat there like a tombstone to the street beyond. A long, sleek black shape was gliding silently toward the house. It was not a taxi. It was not an Uber. It was a Rolls-Royce. Phantom, extended wheelbase, shining in the sun like a black diamond. It moved with the grace of a predator, its massive grille gleaming, its spirit of ecstasy, hood ornament cutting through the air. It slowed to a stop right in front of the walkway, purring like a giant cat. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was huge, wearing a black suit and sunglasses. He walked around the car with military precision and opened the rear passenger door. He stood at attention, waiting. I knew him. It was Marcus, one of Luther's best men, a former Marine who had driven for me years ago. He nodded respectfully as I approached. "Good morning, Mr. Jefferson," he said, his voice deep and rumbling. "We are on schedule. Traffic is clearing up." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, stepping off the porch and walking down the path, the gravel crunching under my new shoes. I heard the screen door slam behind me. Keisha had followed me out. She stood on the porch barefoot, her hair messy, her face pale with shock. She stared at the car, then at me, then back at the car, her mouth hanging open. "Daddy," she screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "What is going on? Whose car is that? Where are you going?" She ran down the steps, stumbling a little, running across the grass toward me. She reached out, trying to grab my arm, trying to anchor me back to her reality. But I kept walking. I reached the car and Marcus held the door wide. The interior was cream-colored leather and walnut wood, a sanctuary of wealth and quiet. I stopped and turned to face her. She skidded to a halt a few feet away, afraid to come closer, afraid of the car, afraid of the man in the suit, afraid of the driver who watched her behind dark glasses. "Daddy, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Talk to me. You cannot just leave. Where did you get this money? What are you doing? Tell me what is happening." She was terrified because her world was tilting on its axis, the narrative of her life, the story where she was the benevolent caretaker and I was the helpless burden, was dissolving right before her eyes. She realized in that moment that she did not know me at all. She realized she had been living with a stranger who could summon a $500,000 car with a phone call. I looked at her. I looked at the daughter I had loved more than life itself, the daughter I had protected from the harshness of the world, the daughter who had smirked when I was slapped. I felt a twinge of pain, a ghost of the affection I used to feel, but I crushed it. I let the cold logic of the situation take over. She had chosen. Her side she had chosen. The man who abused us both, and now she had to live with the consequences of that choice. I stepped into the car, sinking into the soft leather. The smell of the interior was rich and calming. Marcus closed the door with a solid, heavy thud, sealing me inside, sealing me away from her desperation. I pressed the button on the armrest and the window glided down smoothly, revealing Keisha's tear-streaked face. One last time she was shaking, hugging herself, looking small and lost against the backdrop of the house she thought she owned. "Daddy," she whispered one last time. "Please." I leaned forward slightly, the silver lion on my cane glinting in the sunlight. "I am going to the office, Keisha," I said, my voice calm and final. "I am going to see Braden. I am going to where your husband is dying." She stared at me confused. "Dying?" she asked. "Is he hurt? Did something happen?" I shook my head slowly. "No, my child. He is not hurt physically, not yet. But his life, the life he thinks he built, the lies he stands on the future, he bragged about it, is all ending today. I am going to pull the plug." She did not understand. She could not understand. "Not yet, but she would soon enough drive Marcus," I said, leaning back into the seat. The window rolled up, cutting off her sobbing face. The car pulled away smoothly, gliding down the street, leaving my daughter standing in the driveway of a house that was no longer hers, watching her father disappear into a world she never knew existed. I did not look back. I looked forward toward the city skyline, rising in the distance, toward the glass and steel tower of Jefferson Holdings, where a throne was waiting and a reckoning was due. The glass and steel tower of Jefferson Holdings rises 40 stories above the Atlanta pavement, a monument to structural integrity and architectural ambition. I know every inch of that building. I know the psi rating of the concrete in the sub-basement. I know the wind load, tolerance of the curtain walls. I know the names of the men who welded the steel beams because I signed their paychecks 40 years ago. Braden Miller, however, only knew the executive elevator and the view from the corner office he coveted. He arrived at the building 18 minutes late, a cardinal sin in my company where punctuality is a sign of respect. He burst through the revolving doors, sweating like a sinner in church. His expensive Italian suit was rumpled from the run. His tie was crooked, and his face was slick with a sheen of panic and exertion. He bypassed the security desk, waving his badge with a frantic arrogance, ignoring the guard who tried to stop him. He did not notice that his badge did not beep. He did not notice the red light on the turnstile. He just vaulted over it, running toward the elevators, desperate to salvage the illusion of his competence. He rode the elevator to the 40th floor alone, checking his reflection in the polished brass doors. He tried to smooth his hair. He tried to wipe the sweat from his upper lip. He practiced his opening line. Sorry for the delay. Gentlemen, minor transportation issue, but we are ready to launch. He told himself he could still win this. He told himself that charisma could cover the stench of failure. He stepped out of the elevator and walked down the long corridor lined with portraits of the company's past projects, bridges, dams, skyscrapers. He did not look at them. He did not care about the work. He only cared about the reward. He reached the double mahogany doors of the main boardroom. He took a deep breath, arranged his face into a mask of confidence, and pushed them open. The boardroom was a cavernous space dominated by a 30-foot table made of single-slab walnut. 12 men and women sat around it, the board of directors, the gatekeepers of my empire. They were silent as Braden burst in the air. In the room was colder than the morgue. Braden faltered for a second, stopped by the wall of icy stairs. Usually there would be coffee chatter, maybe a polite nod. Today, there was nothing, just 12 pairs of eyes watching him like a jury watching a murderer take the stand. Braden cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "My apologies. Traffic in this city is a nightmare, as you know, but I am here, and I am ready to unveil the future of Jefferson Holdings Project New Horizon." He walked to the head of the table, the spot reserved for the CEO, the spot he thought was his birthright. He placed his briefcase on the table and plugged his laptop into the presentation system. His hands were shaking. He tried to hide it by gripping the podium, but everyone saw it. The silence stretched out, painful and thick. "Let us not waste any more time," Braden said, tapping the keyboard. "This quarter has been challenging, but with New Horizon, we are going to revolutionize our supply chain and increase margins by 20%. He clicked the remote to bring up his first slide. He expected to see his sleek blue graphics, his projections of wealth and dominance. He turned to look at the massive screen behind him, expecting applause or at least nods of approval. Instead, he heard a gasp from the end of the table, followed by a low murmur of disbelief. Braden turned back to the screen and froze. The screen was not showing Project New Horizon. It was showing a scanned document, a PDF with a red stamp that read, "Internal Audit Fraud Investigation, High Priority." Braden blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It was an invoice dated 6 months ago for 300 tons of structural steel for the Midtown Bridge project. The vendor was listed as Miller Logistical Solutions, a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The price per ton was listed at 3 times. The market rate underneath the invoice was a bank transfer record showing the funds moving from Jefferson Holdings to Miller Logistical Solutions, and then immediately to a private account in Braden's name labeled Gambling Debts. Braden clicked the remote, frantically trying to advance the slide, trying to get the damning evidence off the screen, but the system was locked out, controlled by someone else. The slide changed. But not to his presentation. It changed to a series of photographs. Photos of substandard concrete being poured into the foundations of a low-income housing project. Concrete that Braden had authorized to save money, pocketing the difference, photos of falsified safety inspection reports with his signature clearly visible at the bottom. Photos of him shaking hands with a known loan shark in the parking lot of a casino. The screen was not a presentation. It was an indictment. It was a digital autopsy of his career. "What is this?" Braden stammered, his face draining of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. "This is not my presentation. Someone has hacked the system. This is a mistake, a malicious attack. I assure you these documents are fake." He looked around the table, begging for an ally, begging for someone to believe him. But the board members were not looking at him anymore. They were looking at their tablets where the full forensic accounting report had just been emailed by Luther. They were reading the details of how Braden had siphoned off $2.5 million in 3 years, how he had endangered lives by using cheap materials, how he had treated the company, coffers like his personal piggy bank. Mr. Miller, the chairman of the board, Arthur Sterling, spoke up, his voice dry and hard as granite. "We have been monitoring these irregularities for weeks. We were waiting for the final piece of evidence to link the shell companies directly to you, and it seems you provided it this morning when you tried to transfer emergency funds from the company accounts to your personal ledger to pay for a taxi. The system flagged it immediately. You are not here to be named CEO, son. You are here to be terminated. Braden backed away from the podium, shaking his head. No, you cannot do this. I am the visionary here. I brought in the city contract. I am family, he screamed the last word as if it were a magic spell that could ward off the truth. Family, I am the son-in-law of the founder. That was the moment the heavy double doors at the back of the room opened slowly, deliberately. They did not fly open with the frantic energy of Braden's arrival. They swung inward with the weight of authority. The sound of a cane striking the floor echoed through the silent room. Thud, click, a rhythm of impending doom. I walked into the room, Luther at my side. I was no longer the old man, wheezing in the basement. I was Isaiah Jefferson in my charcoal suit, my gold cufflinks catching the light, my silver-headed cane planting firmly on the plush carpet. I walked tall, my lungs burning, but my spirit soaring. I walked past the portraits of the buildings I had built, past the men and women who managed my legacy, and I stopped at the foot of the table, looking down the length of the walnut slab directly at Braden. Braden stared at me, his eyes bulging out of his head. His brain could not process the data. He saw the suit, he saw the cane, he saw the man he had slapped 12 hours ago, but he could not reconcile the image with the reality. His mind snapped, retreating into denial, into rage, into the only defense he had left. Arrogance. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face twisting into a sneer of pure hatred. "Security!" he screamed, his voice cracking high and shrill, breaking the dignified silence of the boardroom. "Security! Get in here! Why is this old beggar in the building? How did he get past the lobby? Get him out! Get him out! Now he is trespassing!" He looked at the board members, expecting them to share his outrage, expecting them to call the guards. "Look at him!" Braden yelled, desperate now, hysterical. "He is my father-in-law. He is a senile old leech. He followed me here to embarrass me. He is crazy. Get him out!" No one moved. The board members sat like statues, their eyes fixed on me, not with annoyance but with reverence. Arthur Sterling, the chairman, stood up slowly. Buttoning his jacket, he looked at Braden with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Mr. Miller," Arthur said, his voice cutting through Braden's hysterics, "sit down and be quiet. You are not addressing a beggar. You are addressing the majority shareholder and the chairman emeritus of this corporation." Braden froze, his mouth hanging open. He looked at Arthur, then at me, then back at Arthur. What he whispered, the word escaping him like a dying breath. Chairman emeritus. But he is just ice. He pours concrete. He lives in my basement. I took a step forward, the silver lion on my cane gleaming. "I built this table, Braden," I said, my voice low and rough, filling the room without shouting. "I built this building. I poured the foundation with my own hands, while you were still learning how to tie your shoes. You say I stink of poverty. Son, I stink of hard work. I stink of the sweat that paid for your suit, your car, and the house you tried to kick me out of. You thought Jefferson was just a name on the letterhead. You thought it was a coincidence. You never asked, did you? You never asked who I was. You just saw an old man and assumed you were better." Braden backed up until he hit the whiteboard, the projection of his crimes beaming onto his chest, turning him into a billboard of his own corruption. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "This is a trick. This is some kind of sick joke. Keisha put you up to this, didn't she?" I did not answer him. I walked to the head of the table, the seat Braden had been standing in front of moments ago. I pulled out the chair, the heavy leather creaking, and I sat down. I placed my cane on the table, the silver lion facing him. I placed the titanium seal next to it, the symbol of my authority. Finally, I placed the eviction notice he had thrown at me the night before, smoothing it out on the polished wood. "You gave me 24 hours, Braden," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I am giving you 24 seconds. You are fired. You are under investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and corporate espionage, and as of this moment, your security clearance is revoked. You are trespassing on my property." Braden looked around the room, looking for a friendly face, looking for an escape. But the doors were blocked by security guards who had quietly entered behind me. Big men, men who knew who signed their checks, and it was not Braden Miller. He slumped against the wall, the fight draining out of him, leaving only a hollow shell of a man who realized too late that he had been standing on a trapdoor the whole time, holding the lever in his own hand. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, a vacuum where sound went to die. Braden was pressed against the whiteboard, his chest heaving, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for an exit that did not exist. He looked at the board members, 12 of the most powerful men and women in the construction industry. People he had spent 5 years trying to impress, people whose boots he had licked and whose egos he had stroked, hoping they would save him, hoping they would laugh and say this was all a misunderstanding, but they did not laugh. They did not look at him. They looked at me, Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the board, a man who had been the best man at my wedding 40 years ago, a man who ran this company with an iron fist while I lived in the shadows, slowly pushed his chair back. The sound of the expensive casters rolling on the plush carpet echoed like thunder. Arthur stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a solemnity reserved for state funerals, and he turned to face me. He did not look at the old man in the charcoal suit. He looked at the legend. He remembered. He looked at the friend he had missed. "Welcome home, Mr. Chairman," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. He bowed his head, a deep, respectful gesture that signaled submission and loyalty. "Welcome back to the house you built." Braden let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. He slid down the wall a few inches, his legs giving way under the weight of a reality. He could not comprehend, Chairman. He whispered the word, catching in his throat like a fishbone, Chairman. "But he is ice. He is a nobody." I ignored him. I walked past Arthur, who stepped aside to clear my path. I walked past the vice presidents and the directors, who all stood up as I passed, a wave of respect rippling down the table. I reached the head of the table, the seat that had been empty for a decade, the seat Braden had tried to claim 10 minutes ago. I rested my hands on the back of the high leather chair, feeling the familiar grain of the upholstery. This was my seat. I had designed it. I had sat in it when we won the bid for the airport expansion. I had sat in it when we decided to go public. I had sat in it the day Beatrice told me she was sick. I sat down. The leather creaked under my weight, a sound of permanence. I placed my cane on the table, the silver lion facing outward. I looked at Braden, who was now crouching on the floor, looking up at me with the eyes of a child who has just realized the monster under the bed is real and it knows his name. "You look confused." "Son," I said, my voice low and rumbling, filling the cavernous room, "let me help you with the math. You seem to be struggling with, you see, Jefferson. Holdings is not a public trust. It is not a democracy. It is a kingdom, and I am the king. I retired 10 years ago. Yes, I stepped back to take care of my dying wife and to watch over my daughter. But I never sold Braden. I never walked away. I retained 60% of the voting stock. 60%. That means I do not just have a seat at this table. I am the table. Nothing happens in this company without my permission. No concrete is poured, no steel is welded, and certainly no CEO is appointed without my signature." Braden shook his head slowly, tears of shock streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat. "But you live in my basement," he stammered. "You fix the sink. You drive a truck from 1990? How?" I leaned forward, the gold cufflinks flashing. "I live in your basement because I promised my wife I would not spoil our daughter. I lived simply because I wanted to see if you were a man of character or a man of greed. And you gave me my answer every single day. For 5 years, you treated the waiter better than you treated your father-in-law. You treated your car better than you treated your wife. You thought my silence was weakness. You thought my humility was poverty. You were wrong on both counts." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It landed on the polished walnut table with a heavy thud, the sound of a judge's gavel sealing a verdict. "You said something to me last night, Braden," I continued, my voice hardening, turning into the cold steel edge that had built this empire. "You told me I stank. You told me I smelled worse than smoke. You told me I smelled like old medicine and poverty. Well, son, take a deep breath. Right now, smell the air in this room. Tell me what you smell, because to me it smells like wet concrete pouring into a rebar cage at 4 a.m. in the freezing rain. It smells like the diesel fumes of the excavators digging the foundation of this very building. It smells of the sweat of 10,000 men who worked double shifts to build this city. That is my scent. Braden, that is the smell of the work that paid for your $5,000 suit. That is the smell of the legacy you tried to steal. That is the smell of the chair you wanted to sit in but were not strong enough to carry." Braden tried to stand up, his legs shaking violently. "I did not know," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I swear I did not know. Ice, Mr. Jefferson, please, we are family." "Family," I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. Family does not slap a 75-year-old man because he asks for clean air. Family does not evict a father-in-law to a state-run nursing home so they can turn a bedroom into a walk-in closet. Family does not embezzle $2.5 million from the company that feeds them. I opened the envelope and spread the documents across the table for the board to see. They were forensic accounting reports, bank statements, and copies of the fake invoices Braden had generated over the last 3 years. "Luther, step forward," I said without looking away from Braden. Luther stepped out from the shadows near the door, placing a second stack of papers in front of me. "We have been watching you, Braden," I said, pointing a finger at his chest. "We have been watching you since the first time you expensed a personal vacation to the company account 3 years ago. We watched you set up Miller Logistical Solutions in the Cayman Islands. We watched you approve invoices for steel that was never delivered and concrete that was never poured. We watched you gamble away the money at casinos in Vegas and Atlantic City. We let you do it because I wanted to see how far you would go. I wanted to see if you would stop, if you would find a conscience. But you did not stop. You got greedy, you got sloppy, and last night you got violent." Braden looked at the papers on the table, his face pale as a sheet. $2.5 million, Braden, I said, letting the number hang in the air. "That is a lot of money. That is enough money to build a school or a hospital or to retire comfortably, but you put it up your nose and you threw it on the blackjack table and you thought you were smart. You thought you were the Wolf of Wall Street, but you were just a sheep, stealing from the shepherd, Arthur." Sterling spoke up again, his voice dripping with disdain. "The board has reviewed the evidence. Mr. Miller, we have voted unanimously effective immediately. Your employment with Jefferson Holdings is terminated for cause. You are stripped of all stock options, your pension is frozen pending the investigation, and we are exercising the clawback clause in your contract to recover every single cent you stole." Braden looked at Arthur, then at me, his eyes wide with terror. "Terminated," he whispered. "But I have debts. I have people I owe money to. If I lose this job, if I cannot pay them, they will kill me." I leaned back in my chair, resting my hands on the head of my cane. "That sounds like a personal problem, Braden," I said coldly. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you slapped the man who signs the checks. Maybe you should have thought about that before you called me a leech. Maybe you should have asked yourself why the old man in the basement knew so much about structural engineering." I picked up the phone on the conference table, the black handset that connected directly to the security desk. I did not dial, I just spoke security. "Send the team up to the boardroom. We have a trespasser and have the police waiting in the lobby." Braden flinched at the word police. He looked at the window as if considering jumping. He looked at the door blocked by the guards. He realized there was no way out. The walls of the life he had built were collapsing around him, and he was standing in the middle of the rubble without a hard hat. "You cannot do this to me," he screamed, finding a last reserve of hysterical strength. "I am your son-in-law. Keisha will never forgive you. She loves me. She will hate you for this." I stood up slowly, towering over him from the end of the table. "Keisha loved the idea of you, Braden," I said quietly. "She loved the success. She loved the money. She loved the image. But the image is a lie and the money was stolen. She will survive. She is a Jefferson. She has concrete in her blood. She just forgot it for a while because you clouded her vision with smoke. But the smoke is clearing now, son. The air is getting clean again." The double doors opened and 4 security guards marched in. They were not the regular lobby guards. They were my private detail, men who moved with efficient violence. They grabbed Braden by the arms, lifting him off the floor as if he weighed nothing. He kicked and screamed, his expensive shoes scuffing the carpet. He yelled obscenities, he yelled please, he yelled my name. But I did not look at him. I looked down at the paperwork on the table. I picked up a pen, a heavy gold fountain pen, and I signed the termination order with a flourish. "Isaiah Jefferson. Get him out of here," I said, waving my hand as if shooing away a fly. They dragged him out, screaming, echoing down the hallway until the elevator doors closed, cutting off the noise. Silence returned to the boardroom, heavy and respectful. The board members looked at me, waiting for my next move, waiting to see if the king had returned for good or just for the execution. I looked at Arthur Sterling and smiled, a tired but satisfied smile. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, sitting back down. "Now let us talk about the future of this company because we have a lot of work to do to clean up the mess that boy left behind and someone get me a coffee." "Black, no sugar." I have a feeling it is going to be a long day. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city of Atlanta sprawled out below me. I saw the bridges I had built, the towers I had raised. I saw the legacy that I had almost let slip away because of a misguided promise, but today the promise was rewritten. Today the foundation was reinforced. Braden Miller was gone, erased like a mistake on a blueprint. But I was still here, and I was just getting started. The concrete was still wet, and I had a new world to build, one where respect was the cornerstone and betrayal was buried deep beneath the earth where it belonged. While I was dissecting Braden's career in the boardroom across the city, another team was arriving at the mansion in the suburbs. I did not need to be there to see it. I had access to the security cameras from my tablet, a feed I had installed years ago to ensure my daughter's safety, but which now served as the window to her reckoning. I sat in the high leather chair of the CEO's office, sipping the black coffee I had requested, and I watched the screen. Keisha was pacing the living room floor, her phone pressed to her ear, her other hand twisting a strand of hair nervously. She was calling Braden over and over again. But Braden was currently in the back of a police cruiser, his phone confiscated, his hands cuffed behind his back. She called me next. I saw her thumb hit the speed dial for Daddy, but my phone sat silent on the desk, face down. I was done answering calls today. I was sending messages. She looked around the empty house, the silence amplifying her panic. The party mess from the night before was still there. Stale smoke and empty bottles, a testament to a life of hollow celebration. She did not clean. She just paced, waiting for someone to fix it, waiting for the men in her life to tell her what to do. She went to the window looking for the Porsche, looking for the Rolls-Royce, looking for anything familiar. But what pulled into the driveway was not a luxury car. It was a convoy of reality, 3 black SUVs and a sheriff's department cruiser. The lights were not flashing, but the urgency was palpable. I watched her face on the screen as she saw them. She backed away from the window, her hand covering her mouth. She thought perhaps Braden had been in an accident. She thought they were coming with bad news. She had no idea they were the bad news. She ran to the front door, opening it before they could knock, desperate for information, desperate for reassurance. She was met by a wall of uniforms, a court marshal, a bank representative, and 4 private security officers wearing the insignia of the Jefferson Trust. "Mrs. Miller," the marshal asked, his voice flat and professional, holding a clipboard like a shield. Keisha nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, is Braden. Okay. Has something happened to my husband?" The marshal did not smile. He did not offer sympathy. He simply handed her a document, a thick packet of papers stapled with a red cover sheet. "Ma'am, this is an order of immediate eviction and asset seizure pursuant to a court order issued this morning regarding the property at 1402 Oakwood Drive. You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises." Keisha stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. "Eviction?" she stammered, laughing, a high-pitched, nervous sound that bordered on hysteria. "That is impossible. There must be a mistake. This is my house. My husband bought this house 3 years ago. We own it. You have the wrong address." The bank representative stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mrs. Miller, according to the deed and the mortgage records, this property is owned solely by the Jefferson Trust. Your husband Braden Miller is listed as the primary tenant on a lease-to-own agreement, an agreement that is currently in default." Keisha shook her head violently, backing into the foyer. No, that is a lie. Braden told me he bought it cash. He told me it was ours. He showed me the papers." The representative sighed, the sigh of a man who has had this conversation too many times with too many naive spouses. "Ma'am, the papers were likely forged, or you misunderstood the arrangement. The reality is that no rent has been paid on this property for 6 months. The Jefferson Trust has exercised its right to terminate the lease immediately due to non-payment in violation of the moral turpitude clause in the contract." 6 months. Keisha whispered, the blood draining from her face. 6 months. "But he goes to work every day. He makes thousands of dollars. Where is the money?" The representative looked at his notes, checking a ledger he held in his hand. "According to our investigation, the funds intended for housing were diverted to various offshore gambling sites and unauthorized personal expenditures, mostly high stakes, poker debts, and vehicle leases that have also defaulted." I watched Keisha crumble on the high-definition screen. It was not a physical collapse, but a spiritual one. The foundation of her marriage, the belief that she had married a successful provider, was dissolving into dust. Braden had not bought her a palace. He had rented her a stage set, and he had not even paid the rent. She looked around the foyer at the crystal chandelier at the marble floors, realizing suddenly that she was a squatter in her own life. "This is crazy!" she screamed suddenly, finding a reserve of denial. "Get out of my house. Get out right now. I am calling my lawyers. I am calling my father. He will fix this. He has money. Now you saw the car. He will buy this place and throw you all in jail." The marshal stepped into the house, crossing the threshold uninvited, signaling his team to follow. "Ma'am, you do not have a lawyer who can stop a federal seizure order, and as for your father, the Jefferson Trust is the entity evicting you. If he has any influence here, it is certainly not being used to stop us. Now please step aside. We need to secure the assets." "Assets," Keisha yelled, grabbing a Ming vase from the entry table, clutching it to her chest. "These are my things. You cannot take my things. Everything inside this house is considered collateral against the outstanding debt," the bank representative said calmly, his voice cold. "Everything, furniture, electronics, art, jewelry, it all stays to cover the 6 months of back rent. And the damages," Keisha looked at the vase, then at the marshal, then at the security guards who were already moving into the living room, beginning to tag items with red stickers, seizing her life piece by piece. She turned and ran for the stairs, likely heading for the bedroom to grab her jewelry, her designer bags, the things she valued more than her dignity. "Stop her!" the marshal ordered. 2 security guards moved fast, intercepting her at the bottom of the stairs, blocking her path gently but firmly. "Ma'am, you cannot go upstairs. You cannot remove any items from the premises." "But my clothes," Keisha shrieked, clawing at the guard's arm. "My diamonds, my furs." "Braden gave them to me. They are gifts. Bought with stolen money," the representative corrected. "Bought with funds embezzled from the very trust that owns this house. They are evidence, ma'am, not gifts." I sat in my office watching my daughter fight for handbags while her husband was in handcuffs, watching her prioritize things over truth. It was a painful lesson, but a necessary one. She had to hit rock bottom. She had to feel the cold, hard ground before she could ever learn to stand up. I watched as the marshal took her by the arm, guiding her back toward the front door. She was kicking and screaming now, crying, mascara running down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. She looked at the camera in the hallway, looking right at me, though she did not know it, begging the universe for a savior, begging for the easy way out she had always been given. "You cannot do this," she wailed as they pushed her out onto the porch. "You cannot throw me out on the street. I have nowhere to go. I have nothing." The marshal stopped her on the front step, handing her a small plastic bag. Inside were her car keys, her phone, and her wallet. "That is all you are cleared to take. Ma'am, the car is parked on the street. It is not part of the seizure yet, though I suggest you check with the repo men before you get comfortable." He closed the massive oak front door in her face, the sound echoing through the speakers on my tablet. Click, thud, lock. The sound of a life being foreclosed. Keisha stood on the porch, staring at the closed door, shivering in the morning air, despite the heat she was wearing. The same red dress from the party the night before, now wrinkled and stained, smelling of stale smoke and desperation. She looked down at her bare feet. She had run out without shoes in her haste to stop me earlier, and now she was barefoot on the rough stone, barefoot and homeless. She walked slowly down the steps, her movements jerky and robotic. She looked at the driveway. The Porsche was gone, towed away, while she was arguing inside. She looked at the street. Her own car, a white Mercedes, was there, but there was a boot on the wheel, a bright yellow clamp of reality. She screamed a primal sound of rage and frustration. She threw the plastic bag at the door. She fell to her knees on the manicured lawn, the grass staining her dress. She cried for Braden. She cried for me. She cried for me. The unfairness of it all, never once stopping to think that she had smirked while I was slapped. Never once stopping to think that she had watched me suffocate in a basement while she drank wine. I reached out and touched the screen, tracing the image of my weeping daughter. I loved her enough to let this happen. I loved her enough to break her so she could be put back together, right? "Luther," I said into the intercom on my desk, "send a team to secure the perimeter of the house. Make sure she does not try to break back in, but do not help her. Do not offer her a ride. Do not offer her money. Let her sit there. Let her feel it." "Yes, sir," Luther replied. I turned off the tablet, the screen going black, reflecting my own tired face. I had taken away the toys. I had taken away the shelter. Now we would see what was left when the decorations were stripped away. Now we would see if there was any Jefferson steel left in her spine, or if she was just Braden Miller's accessory. I stood up and walked to the window. Looking down at the city traffic, life was going on. People were working, people were building, people were surviving. My daughter was about to learn how to be one of them. Welcome to the real world. Baby girl, I whispered against the glass. Welcome to the concrete jungle. I hope you brought your work boots, because the free ride is over and the rent is finally due. The lobby of Jefferson Holdings is a cathedral of capitalism, designed to make anyone walking through it feel small. It has ceilings that soar 3 stories high, walls of Italian marble, and a floor polished to such a high sheen it looks like a frozen lake. Usually it is a place of hushed tones and clicking heels, but at 10:30 that morning it was a circus arena, and Braden Miller was the clown being fed to the lions. I watched from the monitors in my office as the elevator doors slid open and my security team hauled him out. He was not walking, he was being dragged. His expensive Italian loafers skidding across the stone, his jacket half off his shoulder, his tie pulled loose like a noose around his neck. He was screaming threats. He was screaming about lawsuits. He was screaming my name, but his voice was drowned out by the wall of noise waiting for him. Luther had been busy while I was firing Braden upstairs. Luther had leaked a tip to the business press, and the local crime beat reporters were waiting by the revolving doors like a pack of hungry wolves smelling blood. The moment Braden appeared, the flashbulbs started popping like strobe lights, blinding him, capturing every detail of his humiliation. Questions were shouted from every direction. Mr. Miller, is it true you embezzled $3 million? Mr. Miller, do you have a comment on the fraud allegations, Mr. Miller? Are you going to prison? Braden tried to shield his face with his hands, trying to hide from the very fame he had always craved. He had wanted to be on the front page of the business section. Well, he got his wish, just not the headline he expected. The guards did not stop at the door. They pushed him through the revolving glass and threw him onto the sidewalk in front of the building. He landed hard on his hands and knees, scuffing his pants, tearing the fabric at the knee. His briefcase was tossed out after him, landing with a thud and spilling papers onto the concrete papers that were now worthless, just like him. Stay off the property. Miller, the head of security, shouted loud enough for the cameras to pick up, or you will be arrested for trespassing. Braden scrambled to his feet, wild-eyed and panting, looking at the cameras, looking at the people on the street who had stopped to watch the spectacle. He looked for his Porsche, instinctively scanning the curb for his escape pod. But the Porsche was gone, sitting in an impound lot somewhere across town. He looked for a taxi, but no one stopped, for a disheveled man screaming at the sky. He was alone, surrounded by millions of people, but completely alone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the one thing the police had let him keep for now. He dialed with trembling fingers, and I knew exactly who he was calling. I switched the camera feed on my tablet, tapping into the city-wide surveillance network that Jefferson Holdings had helped install years ago. I found the feed for the front of the mansion in the suburbs. Keisha was still sitting on the lawn, her red dress stained with grass and dirt, her bare feet tucked under her. She was holding her phone, staring at it, praying for it to ring. When it finally did, she answered it so fast she almost dropped it. Braden. She screamed, her voice hysterical. Where are you? They kicked me out. They took the house. They took everything. You have to come get me right now. I watched Braden on one screen and Keisha on the other, two halves of a disaster trying to connect. Braden was pacing the sidewalk in front of my building, dodging pedestrians, yelling into his phone, "Come get you. Are you insane? I am in front of the office with half the press corps in Atlanta taking pictures of my misery. I need you to come get me. Bring the Mercedes. Bring cash. My cards are not working." They took the Mercedes, Keisha wailed, her voice echoing through the speaker on my desk. They put a boot on it, Braden. They threw me out with nothing but my keys and my phone. I am barefoot, Braden. I am barefoot in the front yard, and the neighbors are watching. I have no money. I have no car. I have nowhere to go. Braden stopped pacing. He stood still in the middle of the sidewalk, Let jostling him as they passed. "What do you mean you have nothing?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You are useless, Keisha. You are completely useless. I told you to fix this. I told you to handle your father, and now I am ruined because of you." "Do not. You dare blame me," Keisha shrieked, standing up from the grass, her face twisted with rage. You are the one who embezzled money. You are the one who lied about buying the house. You told me we owned it, Braden. You told me we were rich and now I am homeless. Because of your lies. Shut up, Braden roared, attracting the attention of a police officer standing nearby. Just shut up and meet me. Meet me at Centennial Park by the fountain. It is halfway between us. Figure it out, walk, run, crawl, I do not care. Just get there and bring whatever jewelry you manage to save. We need to pawn it to buy bus tickets. Bus tickets, Keisha whispered, the reality finally sinking in. Bus tickets to where? Anywhere that is not here. Braden snapped and hung up. I watched him shove the phone into his pocket and start walking. He kept his head down, moving fast, trying to blend into the crowd, trying to disappear, but he could not disappear from me. I tracked him block by block, camera by camera. I tracked Keisha as she started the long humiliation of walking 3 miles to the park. Barefoot, her red dress attracting stares and whispers. She looked like a fallen prom queen. A tragedy in chiffon, walking on the hot pavement, blistering her feet, paying the toll for every step she had taken. In red-bottom shoes she did not earn. It took them an hour to reach the park. Centennial Olympic Park is a beautiful place, a green oasis in the middle of the city filled with tourists and families and splashing fountains. I know it well because I donated the land for the northern expansion. I paid for the granite paving stones. I paid for the security system that was now tracking my daughter and her husband as they converged on the main plaza, like 2 missiles on a collision course. They spotted each other from a distance. Braden was sitting on a bench, his tie gone, his shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, sweating profusely. Keisha was limping, holding her shoes in her hand, her hair a bird's nest of tangles. She saw him, and for a second I thought she might run to him for comfort. I thought maybe in their shared ruin they would find some shred of humanity, some bond of love. But I was wrong. They did not run to each other. They charged. You, Keisha screamed, throwing her plastic bag of belongings at him. You did this. You destroyed my life. Look at me, Braden. Look at me. I am barefoot in a public park because of you. Braden stood up, kicking the bag aside. Get a hold of yourself. You look like a crazy person, he spat back, looking around nervously. You think I wanted this? You think I planned to be humiliated? You want to know whose fault this is. It is your father's, that psycho old man. Set me up. He trapped me. Set you up. Keisha laughed, a dry, humorless sound that sounded like glass breaking. He did not make you steal. Braden, he did not make you gamble away our rent money. He did not make you lie to me for 3 years. You are a fraud. You are a loser, and I married a loser. Braden grabbed her arm, squeezing it hard enough to bruise. Do not you ever call me that. He snarled, his face inches from hers. I gave you everything, Keisha. I gave you the life you wanted. You were happy enough to spend the money when it was coming in. You were happy enough to drink the champagne and wear the diamonds you did not. Ask where it came from. Did you just took it. I took it because I thought you earned it, she yelled, pulling away from him, shoving him back. I thought you were smart. I thought you were a businessman, but you were just a thief and a bad one at that. Oh, I am the stupid one, Braden shouted, throwing his hands in the air. I am the stupid one, your father is. Isaiah Jefferson Keisha. Isaiah Jefferson, the billionaire founder of the company, and you did not know you lived with him for 30 years, and you did not know he was sitting on a fortune. You thought he was a janitor. You are the stupid one, Keisha. You let a gold mine live in your basement, and you treated him like trash. If you had been nicer to him, if you had just played the game, we would be inheriting an empire right now instead of running from the police. Keisha froze, the accusation hitting her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She knew he was right. She knew that her own blindness, her own arrogance had cost her everything, but she could not admit it, not to him, not now. He is a monster, she hissed, her eyes filling with hateful tears. He watched us struggle. He watched us rent that house. He watched us drown in debt, and he did nothing. He sat there with his millions and judged us. He is sick. Braden, he is a sick, twisted old man. He is not sick. Braden laughed bitterly. He is a genius. He played us, Keisha. He played us like fiddles. He waited until I was about to win, and then he pulled the rug out. He wanted to destroy me, because he was jealous, because I was young and ambitious and he was just old furniture. Well, he won. Are you happy? He won, and now we have nothing. I watched them from my office, my coffee cold on the desk. I watched them tear each other apart in high definition. I listened to them blame everyone but themselves. They blamed me. They blamed the company. They blamed the economy. They blamed bad luck. They did not once say I am sorry. They did not once say we were wrong. They were incapable of introspection. Their souls were so calloused by greed that they could not feel the sting of conscience. Braden sat back down on the bench, putting his head in his hands, defeat finally slumping his shoulders. "What do we do now?" he muttered, his voice muffled. "What do we do?" Keisha. Keisha looked down at him, her eyes cold and hard. "I do not know what you are going to do," she said, stepping back, her voice shaking with a new resolve. "But I am not going to jail with you. I am not going down for your crimes." "Braden?" Braden looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What does that mean?" "It means I am done," Keisha said. She turned her back on him, looking toward the street, looking for a way out, looking for a savior who was not coming. "I am going to the police. Braden, I am going to tell them everything. I am going to tell them. You forged the papers. I am going to tell them you stole the money. Maybe if I cooperate, they will let me go." Braden stood up slowly, a dangerous look on his face. "You would not dare." He stepped toward her. "You are my wife. You cannot testify against me." "Watch me!" Keisha spat, and then she started to run or hobble, really on her blistered feet, moving away from him, moving toward the street corner where a police cruiser was idling, likely monitoring the park. Braden lunged for her, but he stopped. He saw the police car too. He saw the people watching. He saw the end of the line. He stood there in the middle of the park alone, surrounded by the wreckage of his life, watching his wife limp away to sell him out. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. The tragedy was complete. The family I had tried to build was gone, replaced by two strangers fighting over scraps in a public park. I felt no joy, only a deep, hollow ache, but underneath the ache was the steel certainty that I had done the right thing. They needed to be broken so they could be fixed or swept away. I opened my eyes and reached for the phone on my desk. It was time for the next phase. It was time to ensure that Keisha's path to redemption was not paved with more easy outs. She thought she could trade her husband for her freedom. She was about to find out that freedom costs more than snitching. It costs repentance. "Luther," I said when he answered the line monitor. "The police station. Keisha is on her way in. She is going to try to cut a deal. Make sure the DA knows she is not a victim. She was a beneficiary. Let her face the heat. Let her sweat. Do not bail her out. Do not offer her a lawyer. Let her sit in that holding cell and think about the smirk. Let her think about the smoke. Let her think about her father." "Understood, sir," Luther said, his voice devoid of judgment. Just pure efficiency. I hung up and looked back at the screen. Braden was still standing in the park, staring at the ground. He looked small from this angle, like an insect that had been stepped on but not quite squashed. I zoomed in on his face. He was crying. Not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity. He was mourning the loss of the Porsche. He was mourning the loss of the suit. He was mourning the loss of the image he had worshipped. I turned off the screen, cutting the connection, cutting the cord, leaving them to the fate they had designed for themselves. I had a company to run, I had a legacy to secure, and I had no time for tears. Not anymore. The air in the private wealth division of First National Bank is usually kept at a crisp 68 degrees. But when I walked into the office of the regional manager that afternoon, it felt like a sauna. Henry, the manager, was a man I had known for 20 years, a man who usually greeted me with a firm handshake and a pour of scotch. Today he was sweating through his starch collar. He stood up so fast his chair hit the wall behind him, his eyes wide with the specific terror of a man who knows he has been caught sleeping on the watch. "Mr. Jefferson," he stammered, wiping his palms on his trousers. "I was not expecting you today, sir. We usually schedule these reviews quarterly." I did not shake his hand. I did not sit in the guest chair. I walked straight to his desk and placed my cane on the polished wood, the silver lion head staring him down like a judge. "Open the vault." "Henry," I said, my voice low and devoid of warmth. "Open the file on the Grandchildren's Trust, the custodial accounts for Marcus Jr. and Maya right now." Henry swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Sir, those accounts are sealed. They are set for disbursement when the children turn 21 unless there is an emergency. I know the terms." "Henry," I wrote the terms. I cut him off. "Open the file. I want to see the transaction history for the last 30 days. He hesitated for a second too long, looking at his computer screen as if hoping it would magically erase the data he knew was there. Then, with shaking fingers, he typed in his clearance code and turned the monitor toward me. I leaned in, adjusting my glasses, expecting to see the steady growth of conservative bonds and blue-chip stocks, expecting to see the legacy I was building for the only innocent members of this family. Instead, I saw red. There it was, a pending authorization for a margin loan against the entire value of the trust. $1.2 million leveraged to buy into a high-risk speculative cryptocurrency exchange. A digital casino that had crashed 40% just this morning. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the signature at the bottom of the authorization form. I stared at it, my blood turning to ice. It was my signature, or at least a very good copy of it. The loop on the J was perfect. The sharp slant of the I was precise. It was a masterpiece of forgery. But it lacked one thing, the slight tremor at the end of the NA, tremor I have had since I broke my wrist on a job site in '98. Only someone who had studied my writing for years could get it this close. And only someone who did not know about the tremor would miss it. Braden and Keisha. I whispered, the realization hitting me harder than the slaphead. They had not just tried to steal. From me, they had tried to steal from their own children. They were willing to gamble their kids' education, their future, their safety net on a roll of the digital dice. They were monsters eating their own young. Henry, I said, straightening up, my eyes burning holes into the manager. Did you authorize this loan? Henry looked like he was about to faint. Mr. Miller brought the papers in himself. He said you had signed them at the house because you were feeling unwell. He said it was a sure thing, an investment strategy you had approved for the family portfolio. I did not verify it with you verbally. Sir, I assumed because he is your son-in-law. You assumed. I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. You assumed that. Because he wears my suits, he speaks with my voice. Cancel it, cancel the loan, immediately revoke the authorization and flag this attempt as fraud. But sir, the funds were already earmarked. The transfer was scheduled for noon today. If we stop it now, there will be penalties. The exchange will change. Sue. Let them sue. I roared, slamming my hand on the desk. Let them sue me. Let them come for me. I will bury them under a mountain of litigation so deep they will need a mining permit to find sunlight. Cancel the loan. Henry, and then do one more thing for me. What is that, sir? Henry asked, typing furiously, his face pale. Close the accounts. Close the trust, liquidating everything right now, every stock, every bond, every ounce of cash, take it all out. But Sir Henry gasped, stopping his typing. That is the children's money. That is for their school, for their college. If you liquidate it now, there will be tax implications. There will be... I do not care about taxes. Henry, I care about protecting that money from the vultures who gave birth to those children. If that money stays here, Braden will find a way. He will forge another paper. He will bribe another clerk. He will steal the milk out of his own babies' mouths to pay a bookie liquidate it. And where do you want the funds transferred, sir? I looked out the window at the city I had built. I thought about the kids, Marcus Jr. and Maya, stuck in that fancy boarding school in Switzerland, thinking their parents were royalty, thinking their future was paved with gold. They were about to learn a hard lesson, but it was better they learned it now than later. Transfer the entire balance to the Atlanta Children's Foundation, specifically the Fund for Homeless Youth and STEM Education for the Underprivileged. Henry stared at me. You are giving away your grandchildren's inheritance. I am giving it to children who will appreciate it, I said firmly. And as for my grandchildren, I will pay for their education when they earn it. Not before send the wire, Henry. Now I watched the progress bar on the screen load, watched as $1.2 million vanished from the Jefferson family ledger and reappeared in the account of a charity that actually did good work. It was the hardest check I ever wrote, but as the confirmation number popped up, I felt a grim satisfaction. I had just cut the last lifeline Braden and Keisha had. They were not just broke, now they were toxic. While I was walking out of the bank, leaving a shattered manager in my wake, the consequences of my signature were already traveling across the Atlantic at the speed of light. Digital signals bouncing off satellites and landing in a server in Geneva, Switzerland, specifically in the accounting office of the Le Rosé Institute, the most expensive boarding school in the world, where my grandchildren were currently taking horseback riding lessons. I did not need to be there to hear the conversation. I knew exactly how it would go, because I know how institutions like that work. They do not tolerate poverty. and they certainly do not tolerate bounced checks. Keisha was sitting on a metal bench outside the precinct station. She had been released pending further investigation. Her fingerprints were ink on her hands. Her eyes were red and swollen. She was holding her phone, waiting for Braden to call, waiting for a lawyer, waiting for me to come and save her like I always did. But the phone did not ring with salvation. It rang with judgment. She looked at the caller ID, seeing the Swiss country code. She wiped her eyes and answered, trying to sound like the socialite she pretended to be. "Hello," she said, her voice raspy. "This is Keisha Miller." "Mrs. Miller." A voice clipped and cold with a heavy French accent spoke into her ear. "This is Headmaster Vance. I am calling regarding the tuition payment for the upcoming semester and the arrears for the equestrian program." "Oh yes," Keisha stammered, trying to compose herself. "The check is on the way." "Headmaster, my husband handled that this morning. There might be a slight delay due to international banking hours. There is no delay." Mrs. Miller, the headmaster, cut her off. "The transfer has been rejected. The bank has informed us that the trust fund associated with the tuition agreement has been closed, liquidated entirely. The funds do not exist." Keisha froze, the phone pressing hard against her ear. "Closed? What do you mean, closed?" "That is impossible. My father set up that trust. It is irrevocable. It has millions in it." "It had millions in it," Mrs. Miller, the headmaster, corrected. "Now it has zero, and since your personal credit cards on file have also been declined, we find ourselves in an untenable position. We are not a charity institution. Mrs. Miller, we run a school for the elite, and elite implies the ability to pay. Please," Keisha begged her, panic rising in the middle of the sidewalk. "Give us 24 hours. There has been a mistake, a misunderstanding. My father, he is just moving money around. I will fix this." "We do not have 24 hours, the headmaster said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all pretense of politeness. "We have a policy regarding insolvent families. We have already packed Marcus and Maya's belongings. They are currently waiting in the administrative office with their luggage. You need to arrange for their immediate collection. We will not be putting them on a plane. That is your responsibility. If they are not collected by end of business today, we will be forced to contact the local authorities to take custody of abandoned minors." "Abandoned," Keisha screamed, attracting the stares of people walking by. "You cannot do that. They are my children. They are Jeffersons. They are liabilities," Mrs. Miller, the headmaster said, and then the line went dead. Keisha stared at the phone, the screen going black, reflecting her terrified face. She had lost her house, she had lost her car, she had lost her husband to a jail cell, and now she was losing her children. She dialed Braden's number again, desperate, praying, but it went straight to voicemail. She dialed my number, her fingers shaking so bad she hit the wrong digit twice. She pressed send and held the phone to her ear, listening to the ringtone, listening to the sound of her last hope fading away. I sat in the back of the Rolls-Royce watching the city pass by. My phone vibrated on the seat beside me, Keisha's face flashing on the screen. "Daddy, please pick up, Daddy. I am sorry, Daddy, help me. I let it ring." I let it ring until it stopped. I looked at Marcus, my driver. "Take me to the construction site on 4th Street, I said. "I want to smell the wet concrete. I want to remember what it feels like to build something real." Keisha was alone on the bench, the reality of her life crashing down on her like a collapsed roof. She had tried to mortgage her children's future to pay for her husband's sins, and now the bank had foreclosed on everything. She buried her face in her hands and screamed a sound of pure agony that was lost in the noise of the city traffic. No one stopped. No one cared. She was just another woman crying on a bench in a city that only respects strength. And right now, she had none left. She had traded her strength for a smoke and a smirk, and the bill had finally come due with interest. Night had fallen over the city of Atlanta, heavy and humid, a blanket of heat that trapped the exhaust fumes and the smell of desperation against the pavement. I sat in the command center of my office watching the monitors, sipping a glass of water. My body was tired. My lungs ached with a familiar dull throb, but my mind was sharp focused on the final act of the day. Braden and Keisha were no longer in the park. They had moved on, driven by hunger and a delusional hope that their social capital was worth more than their frozen bank accounts. They were heading north toward the gated communities of Buckhead, toward the mansions and the manicured lawns where they had spent the last 3 years pretending to belong. They did not take a taxi because they had no money. They did not take a bus because they did not know how. They walked 5 miles in the dark. Braden, still wearing the ruins of his $5,000 suit, his shirt open to the navel, sweat staining the silk, Keisha limping beside him, her bare feet black with street grime, her red dress torn at the hem. They looked like refugees from a glamorous war zone seeking asylum in the only world they understood. But they were about to learn a lesson about the aristocracy of Atlanta. A lesson I learned 50 years ago when I was trying to get a loan to buy my first cement mixer. Money buys you access, but it does not buy you loyalty. Loyalty is a currency. The rich do not trade in unless there is a profit margin attached. They arrived at the wrought iron gates of the sanctuary, an enclave of old money and new debt where their best friends lived. The Langleys specifically, Trey and Veronica Langley. Trey was Braden's golfing buddy, his partner in crime, the man who had sat on my sofa the night before drinking my wine and laughing at my cough. I watched through the security camera mounted on the gatehouse as Braden pressed the buzzer, frantically leaning his weight against the stone pillar, his face illuminated by the harsh white light of the security keypad. "Answer the door, Trey," Braden muttered, his voice cracked and dry. "Come on, man, pick up. I know you are home. I saw the lights." There was a crackle of static, and then a woman's voice filtered through the speaker, tinny and annoyed. "Who is it?" "It is Braden. Veronica, Braden and Keisha, let us in. Please, we have had a hell of a day. We just need a place to crash for the night, just for tonight until the banks open in the morning." There was a long silence, a pause that stretched out until it became uncomfortable. I could imagine Veronica standing in her marble foyer, looking at the video monitor, looking at the disheveled wreck of a couple standing outside her fortress. I could imagine her curling her lip in disgust, the same way she curled it when she saw a homeless person on the street. "Braden," the voice came back, but it was not Veronica anymore. It was Trey. His voice was not warm. It was not the voice of a drinking buddy. It was the voice of a man protecting his perimeter. "Listen, man, you cannot be here. You need to leave, Trey." "What are you talking about?" Braden pleaded, gripping the bars of the gate. "It is me, Braden. Let us in. Man, we are in trouble. My father-in-law. He went crazy. He locked us out. He stole everything. I just need a couch, man. I need a drink." "We know, Braden." Trey said, his voice cutting through the night air like a knife. "We know everything. It is all over the group chat. It is on the news blogs. Hell, my broker called me an hour ago asking if I had any exposure to Jefferson Holdings, because the founder just launched a fraud investigation against his own son-in-law." "It is a lie," Braden screamed, shaking the gate, rattling the metal. "It is a setup. Ice is senile. He does not know what he is doing. He does not look senile to me," Braden, Trey replied coldly. "He looks like a billionaire who just woke up and found a rat in his pantry. Look, man, I cannot be seen with you. Not right now. The word is out. You are radioactive. Anyone who helps you is going to get audited. Anyone who takes your call is going to get blacklisted by the Jefferson Trust. Do you know how much business I do with them, dude? You know who pours the foundations for my developments. I cannot lose that contract for you. But we are friends." Braden whispered the word, sounding weak and childish against the steel barrier. "We are acquaintances, Braden," Trey corrected him. "We party together because you paid for the bottle service, but the party is over. You are broke, you are under investigation, and frankly, you are a liability. Go away before I call the security patrol." The speaker clicked off, leaving a hollow silence buzzing in the air. Braden stood there for a moment, stunned, his hands still gripping the bars as if he could pull them apart by sheer willpower. Keisha sank to the ground, leaning against the stone wall, burying her face in her knees. She had expected Veronica to save her. She had expected the sisterhood of the country club to mean something. She was finding out that without the membership fee, the sisterhood does not exist. They moved to the next house, the home of the Mitchells, then the Carters, then the Davises' door. After Doctor remained shut, gate after gate remained locked. Word travels faster than light in these circles. By the time Braden and Keisha reached the cul-de-sac at the end of the street, they were not just pariahs, they were ghosts, walking through a world that had already erased them. Lights turned off as they approached. Curtains were drawn tight. Security dogs barked warnings from behind manicured hedges. They were being shunned with a precision that was almost military. Finally, they reached the house of a man named Julian. I remembered Julian. He was a young stockbroker, loud and obnoxious, the one who had made a joke about my cane the night before. He lived in a modern glass box of a house near the edge of the community. Braden did not even bother with the buzzer. This time he climbed the low wall, desperate, ignoring Keisha's pleas to stop. He walked right up to the front door and pounded on it with his fist, banging until the wood shook, leaving bloody knuckle prints on the white paint Julian opened. "Up!" Braden screamed, losing all control. "Open the door." "You coward, you owe me. I gave you the tip on the Midtown project. I made you 50 grand last month. Open the door." The door opened suddenly. Surprising. Braden. He stumbled forward, almost falling into the hallway. Julian stood there wearing a silk robe, a drink in his hand. He did not look afraid. He looked bored. He looked at Braden with the detached amusement of someone watching a reality show. "What do you want, Braden?" Julian asked, taking a sip of his drink. "You are waking up the neighborhood." "I need help." Braden gasped, trying to straighten his jacket, trying to summon some shred of dignity. "I need cash, Julian. My accounts are frozen. Just a loan, 5 grand, 10 grand, whatever you have in the safe. I will pay you back double next week. I swear." Julian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Pay me back with what, Braden? Monopoly money? Your assets are gone, man. I saw the memo the legal department sent out. You are being sued for 3 times what you are worth. You are going to prison. You are not going to pay anyone back." "Please," Braden begged, dropping to his knees on the welcome mat, begging a man he used to look down on. "Please, Julian. I have nowhere to go. Keisha is barefoot. We haven't eaten. I just need something. Anything." Julian looked down at him, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he sighed. He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off a single bill, a $20 bill crumpled and worn. He tossed it at Braden. It fluttered through the air, landing on Braden's chest, sliding down to rest on his stained shirt. "There," Julian said, his voice dripping with the same poison Braden had used on me. "Go buy yourself a pack of cigarettes. Maybe that will calm your nerves." And Braden looked up, clutching the $20 bill like it was the Holy Grail, tears streaming down his dirty face. "Yes, you stink," Julian said, curling his lip in disgust. "You smell like desperation and poverty. Get off my porch before I hose you down." The door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place with a finality that echoed in the night. Braden stayed on his knees, staring at the door, the $20 bill crunched in his fist, the echo of his own insult coming back to haunt him. "You stink worse than smoke," he had told me. "You stink of poverty now." He was the one wearing the scent, and he wore it poorly. He stood up slowly, his legs shaking. He walked back to the wall where Keisha was waiting. She looked at him, looked at the single bill in his hand, and she did not say a word. She did not ask if they had a place to stay. She knew the answer. She stood up, her feet bleeding, her spirit broken, and they began the long walk back toward the city, back toward the darkness, leaving the lights of the sanctuary behind them. I watched them go, fading into the shadows of the streetlights. 2 figures alone in the world, realizing too late that the friends they bought were only rented and the lease was up. I felt a deep sadness watching them, not for their suffering, but for their blindness. They had chased the wrong things, they had valued the wrong people, and now they were paying the price alone in the dark with $20 to their name and a long night ahead of them. I turned off the monitor. The lesson was learned, the bridges were burned. Now they had to learn how to swim. The night had turned from heavy to suffocating, a blanket of humidity that trapped the stench of exhaust and rotting garbage against the pavement of the Lower West Side. I sat in the back of the Phantom, the engine idling silently while I watched a blinking red dot on my tablet screen, moving slowly through the streets that most people in Atlanta pretend do not exist. This was the Bottoms, an area where streetlights are broken by rocks and sirens are just background noise. Braden and Keisha were walking into the belly of the beast, driven by a desperation that had stripped away their veneer of civilization. I had installed the tracker in Keisha's phone 3 years ago, disguised as a battery-saving app, not because I wanted to spy on her, but because I knew who she had married. I knew that a man like Braden Miller was a ticking time bomb, and I wanted to know where the debris would land when he finally exploded. Tonight was that night. They stopped at a place called the Starlight Motor Inn, a decaying mid-century relic with a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a dying insect. The paint was peeling in long strips like dead skin, and the parking lot was filled with rusted cars and shadows that moved with illicit intent. I watched through the long lens of the camera mounted on the dashboard of the security SUV, trailing them as they entered the lobby. or rather the bulletproof glass cage that passed for a reception desk, Braden was arguing with the clerk, a man who looked like he had seen everything and cared about nothing. Braden slammed his hand against the glass, shouting something about his credit cards, but the clerk just pointed to a sign, cash only and advance. I saw Keisha step forward. She reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace she was wearing, a delicate thing I had given her for her 25th birthday. She slid it through the metal slot under the glass, trading a piece of her father's love for a night in hell. The clerk examined it with a jeweler's loupe, nodded and slid a key across the counter along with a few crumpled bills and change. It was a transaction that marked the absolute nadir of their existence, trading diamonds for a bed with cigarette burns. They walked to room 112 on the ground floor. The door stuck, and Braden had to shoulder it open. I switched my feed from the camera to the audio bug on Keisha's phone. The quality was crystal clear, picking up the hum of the air conditioner and the drip of a leaking faucet inside the room. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and industrial cleaner, trying to mask years of neglect. "This is it," Braden spat, his voice echoing off the thin walls. "This is where we sleep. This is what your father has reduced us to. Are you happy, Keisha? Are you happy that your psycho dad has put us in a roach motel?" I heard the sound of a mattress groaning as Keisha sat down heavily on the bed. "I am not happy, Braden," she whispered, her voice devoid of energy. "I am tired, I am hungry, and I am scared. Look at this place. There are bugs on the floor. The lock on the door looks like it could be kicked in by a child." Braden laughed, a manic sound that had no humor in it. "Scared, you should be scared. We are in a war zone and we are unarmed civilians. You know why we are here. Because you did not do your job. You were supposed to handle him. You were supposed to keep the old man happy, but you let him get ideas. You let him think he was in charge." "I did not let him do anything," Keisha snapped, finding a spark of resistance in her exhaustion. "He is my father. Braden, not a dog. He has always been in charge. We just did not know it. You are the one who underestimated him. You called him a leech. You slapped him. What did you think would happen?" "Do not you dare turn this on me," Braden roared, and I heard the sound of a chair being kicked over. "I gave you everything. I gave you the life you wanted. You loved the parties, you loved the clothes. Do not act like you are innocent. You are just as guilty as I am. But now that the bill is due, you want to bail. You want to run to the police." I heard Keisha stand up, the rustle of her torn dress filling the silence. "I am not running to the police, Braden. I am just trying to survive. Look at us. We are fighting in a motel room that costs $30 a night. We have nothing left except each other, and right now, I am not sure that is worth much." There was a silence, a heavy, dangerous silence that pricked the hairs on the back of my neck. I signaled to Marcus in the front seat. "Get the team ready," I said quietly. "They are close." In the room, Braden's breathing became heavy, erratic, like a bull preparing to charge. "Oh, so I am not worth much now," he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Yesterday I was your king. Yesterday I was the man of your dreams, but now that the money is gone, I am worthless." "Is that it? You are just like your mother, weak and fickle." "Do not talk about my mother," Keisha warned, her voice rising. "I will talk about whoever I want," Braden shouted, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a hand striking flesh. Not a slap this time, but a shove, a violent push that sent Keisha stumbling backward against the wall. I heard the thud of her body hitting the plaster and a sharp cry of pain. "You listen to me, you ungrateful witch," Braden screamed, losing all control. "You are going to fix this. You are going to go back to that old man tomorrow and you are going to beg. You are going to crawl on your knees until he gives us our lives back. And if you do not, I will make you wish you had never been born." "No," Keisha sobbed. "I will not go back. I will not let you use me anymore." Braden moved toward her. I could hear his heavy footsteps on the sticky carpet. I could hear the rustle of his clothes as he raised his arm. I knew what was coming. He was a coward, and cowards always hit those they cannot control. He was going to beat her. He was going to take out all his failure, all his humiliation on the only person smaller than him in the room. I pressed the button on my phone. "Go," I said into the mic. "Go. Now." The door to room 112 did not just open. It disintegrated two of my security specialists, men who made Marcus look small, hit the door with a battering ram. In a synchronized strike, the wood splintered, the lock flew across the room, and the door crashed inward, hanging by a single hinge. Braden spun around, his fist still raised in the air, frozen in a tableau of domestic violence. He looked at the doorway, his eyes wide with shock, blinded by the tactical lights mounted on the guards' weapons. He stumbled back, tripping over his own feet, falling onto the dirty carpet, scrambling backward like a crab until his back hit the radiator. Keisha screamed. Keisha, covering her face, expecting the police, expecting arrest, expecting the end, but the men did not arrest anyone. They stepped into the room, filling the small space with their black tactical gear and their aura of absolute menace. They did not look at Keisha. They looked only at Braden. One of them, a man named Stone, who had served in special forces, walked over to Braden. He did not yell. He did not draw a weapon. He simply leaned down, grabbing Braden by the lapels of his ruined shirt, and hauled him up until his feet were dangling off the floor. Braden gagged, clawing at Stone's hands, his eyes bulging. "Who are you?" he choked out. "What do you want?" Stone looked him in the eye, his face a mask of stone. "Listen to me very carefully, little man," Stone said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the room. "Mr. Jefferson sends his regards." Braden went limp at the mention of my name, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Mr. Jefferson has been watching you," Stone continued. "Watching you steal, watching you lie, and watching you raise your hand against his daughter. He has tolerated your theft. He has tolerated your disrespect, but he draws the line at violence." "Please!" Braden wheezed, tears streaming down his face. I was upset. I did not mean it." Stone shook him once hard, snapping his head back like a rag doll. "I do not care what you meant. I care about your orders. Here is the message. If you touch her again, if you even raise your voice to her, if she so much as gets a paper cut while she is in your presence, you will vanish. Not in a lawsuit, not in a prison cell, you will vanish from the face of the earth. Do you understand me? We will turn you into a missing person poster that no one looks at." Braden nodded frantically, unable to speak, gasping for air. Stone dropped him. He fell to the floor in a heap, coughing and clutching his throat. Stone turned to Keisha. She was pressed against the wall, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. She looked from Stone to Braden, then toward the open door, toward the dark parking lot where she knew I was watching. She waited. She waited for Stone to offer her a hand. She waited for him to say, "Come with us, ma'am. Your father is outside. He wants to take you home." She waited to be rescued, to be scooped up and carried back to safety, back to the life of ease she had always known. But Stone did not offer his hand. He looked at her with a neutral expression, almost sad. "Ma'am," he said, nodding politely, "stay safe." And then they turned and walked out, vanishing into the night as quickly as they had appeared, leaving the broken door hanging on its hinges, leaving the neon light flickering outside, leaving the silence to rush back into the room. Keisha stood there alone, her chest heaving. She looked at the door, then she ran to it, looking out into the parking lot. She saw the taillights of the SUV fading into the distance. She looked for my car, but the Phantom was parked in the shadows, invisible. She realized then, with a jolt of cold horror, that I was not coming in. I had sent my wolves to scare the monster, but I had not sent a shepherd to carry the lamb. "She was on her own, Daddy," she whispered into the darkness, knowing I could hear her, knowing I was there, why I sat in the car, my hand gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles ached. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to go get her, to wrap her in a blanket and take her home to feed her soup and tell her it would be okay. But I knew that if I did that, she would never learn. She would go back to Braden or find another man just like him. She would never find her own strength. She needed to sit in that room. She needed to look at the coward on the floor. She needed to realize that she had a choice to make. Stay in the dirt or climb out on her own, in the room. Braden was pulling himself up onto the bed. Rubbing his throat, he looked at Keisha, his eyes full of fear, but also a new kind of resentment. "Your father is crazy," he rasped. "He is a psychopath. Did you see those guys? They were going to kill me." Keisha turned slowly to face him. She did not look scared anymore. She looked tired. She looked old. She looked at the man she had married, the man she had smirked for, and she saw him clearly. For the first time, he was not a king. He was not a victim. He was a weak, violent little man who had almost hit her because he could not hit back at the world. "He saved you," Keisha said quietly, her voice flat. "He saved you from becoming a wife-beater." Braden, and he saved me from becoming a victim. She walked over to the door and pushed it shut, jamming a chair under the handle because the lock was broken. She went to the far side of the room and sat in the single armchair, pulling her knees up to her chest. She did not look at Braden again. She stared at the wall, watching a cockroach crawl across the peeling wallpaper. "I am not going to beg him, Braden," she said softly. "I am not going to crawl, but I am not going to let you hit me either. You stay on that side of the room, and I will stay on mine, and tomorrow we figure this out." Separately, Braden opened his mouth to argue, to bully her back into submission, but he touched his throat, remembering the grip of the man named Stone, and he closed his mouth. He lay down on the dirty bed, turning his back to her, curling into a ball of misery. I watched for a moment longer, seeing my daughter sitting vigil in a roach motel, guarding her own safety. For the first time in her life, she looked small and broken, but there was a set to her jaw, a hardness in her eyes that reminded me of my mother. She was finding her steel. It was buried deep under layers of entitlement and fear, but it was there. "Drive, Marcus," I said, my voice hoarse. "Drive me home." The car pulled away, slipping silently into the night, leaving the Starlight motor inn behind. I closed my eyes, praying that the lesson would hold, praying that the night would be long enough for her to find herself and short enough for her to survive it. The hardest part of building a foundation is digging through the mud until you hit rock. Tonight Keisha was digging, and I could only hope she hit something solid before she drowned. The sun was barely up when the hammers started singing the song of reconstruction. It is a sound I love, a rhythm of percussion that signals change and progress. I stood on the front lawn of what used to be 1402 Oakwood Drive, drinking a cup of coffee that tasted like victory. The house looked different already. The manicured hedges that Braden had obsessed over were being ripped out, replaced by wheelchair-accessible ramps. The gold leaf paint on the front columns was being scraped away, revealing the honest wood beneath. I had crews working in shifts, stripping the vanity from the structure, turning a monument to greed into a sanctuary for those who had actually earned it. I watched as a team of contractors carried out the white leather sofas, putting them into a dumpster. They were stained with wine and bad memories. I watched as they removed the crystal chandeliers, replacing them with practical lead. Lighting this house was no longer a palace for a thief. It was becoming the Jefferson Center for aging veterans, a place where men and women who had served their country could live with dignity instead of rotting in state-funded warehouses like Shady Pines. The irony was intentional. I was turning the house, Braden used to exclude people, into a home that welcomed the forgotten. I heard the sound of heavy breathing behind me, a ragged, gasping noise like a runner at the end of a marathon. I turned slowly, leaning on my silver-headed cane. Standing at the end of the driveway was a woman I almost did not recognize. She was barefoot, her feet wrapped in bloody strips of torn bedding. She was wearing jeans that were stained with mud and a t-shirt that looked like it had been pulled from a trash can. Her hair was matted with sweat and dirt plastered to her skull. She looked like a ghost. She looked like a specter of misery. It was Keisha. She had run 10 kilometers from the Starlight Motor Inn. She had run through the city, through the suburbs, up the hills, and down the valleys, driven by the terror of being alone with a monster. She had run until her lungs burned and her feet bled. She collapsed when she saw me falling onto the grass. That used to be her pride and joy, her chest heaving violently. She looked up at the house, seeing the workers, seeing the dumpsters, seeing the transformation and confusion, warred with relief on her face. "Daddy," she croaked, her voice a dry rasp. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out, and she crawled the last few feet, reaching out for my shoes, reaching for the hem of my trousers like a beggar reaching for a saint. "Daddy, please help me." I looked down at her. I did not step back, but I did not reach down to help her up. I let her stay there on the ground, connected to the earth, seeing the world from the perspective of the people she used to look down on. "Get up, Keisha," I said, my voice calm but hard as the concrete foundation beneath us. "Get off your knees. Jeffersons do not crawl," she sobbed, shaking her head. I cannot do it anymore, Daddy." I ran all the way here. I escaped. He was going to hit me again. I saw it in his eyes. He blames me for everything. "He blames you because he is a coward," I said simply, "and cowards always need a scapegoat." She managed to pull herself up into a kneeling position, clutching her hands together in a plea. "Daddy, I am sorry. I am so sorry. You were right about him. He is evil. He is a liar. He tricked me. Daddy, he told me he bought the house. He told me he had the money. I believed him because he is my husband. I was a victim too. You have to believe me. I did not know. I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for the truth in her eyes, searching for the daughter I had raised, but all I saw was a woman who was sorry she got caught, a woman who was sorry. The ride was over. You were not a victim, Keisha, I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated in the morning air. You were a volunteer. You say he tricked you. You say you did not know about the money. Let us assume that is true. Let us assume you were blind to the embezzlement and the fraud. That still does not explain the smirk. She froze, the tears stopping instantly as if I had turned off a faucet. The smirk, she whispered. Yes, the smirk. I continued, my grip tightening on my cane the night of the party, the night your husband slapped your 75-year-old father in the face, the night he told me I stank of poverty. You did not scream, you did not jump in front of me, you did not tell him to get out. You stood there with a glass of wine in your hand and you smirked. I saw it, Keisha. I saw the corner of your mouth go up. I saw the satisfaction in your eyes. You liked it. You liked seeing me humiliated because it made you feel superior. It made you feel like you had finally outgrown the man who wiped your nose and paid for your college. That smirk, Keisha, that tiny little movement of your facial muscles, that was the moment you cut the cord. That was the moment you stopped being my daughter and started being his accomplice. Keisha buried her face in her hands, sobbing louder now, a guttural sound of shame. No, Daddy, no. I was scared. I was just trying to keep the peace. You were trying to keep the lifestyle, I corrected her. You chose the suit over the man. You chose the image over the substance. You sold your loyalty for a lease on a Mercedes and a fake mansion. Well, the lease is up, and the mansion is being gutted. I pointed the tip of my cane at the house. Look at it, Keisha. Look at what is happening. This place is being scrubbed clean. I am turning it into a home for veterans. Men like my father. Men who fought for this country and ended up sleeping under bridges because people like Braden stole their pensions. This house is going to serve a purpose. Now it is going to have honor within these walls, something it never had when you lived here. Keisha looked at the house, watching the workers carry out her dining table, watching them throw her curtains into the trash. She realized then that there was no going back. There was no room for her here anymore. Her bedroom was being turned into a physical therapy suite. Her walk-in closet was becoming a supply room. Where am I supposed to go? She wailed, looking up at me with terrified eyes. I have no money. I have no home. My children are in Switzerland being kicked out of school. Braden is going to jail. What am I supposed to do? Daddy, please, just give me some money, just enough to get an apartment, just enough to get the kids. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Keisha's eyes lit up, hope flaring in them like a match. She thought I was reaching for my checkbook. She thought I was reaching for the titanium seal. She thought the nightmare was over and the ATM was open again. But I did not pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a single folded piece of paper. I had typed it up myself that morning on the old typewriter in my office, typing with 2 fingers, just like I did when I started my business 50 years ago. I handed it to her. She took it, her hands shaking, unfolding it, expecting a check, expecting a wire transfer confirmation, expecting salvation. What she saw was a list of 10 phone numbers and addresses. What is this? She asked, looking at it confused. That is your salvation, I said. That is a list of employment agencies, staffing firms, and cleaning services that are currently hiring for unskilled labor. The first one is a commercial laundry service. They pay $12 an hour. The second is a fast food franchise looking for night shift prep cooks. The third is a janitorial service that cleans office buildings downtown. Keisha stared at the paper as if it were infected. Work, she whispered. Cleaning? Yes, work. I said, hard work, honest work, the kind of work that makes your back ache and your hands rough, the kind of work I did for 40 years so you could take ballet lessons and go to private school. You want to eat, Keisha, you work. You want a roof over your head, you work. You want to bring your children home, you work. But Daddy, she pleaded, looking up at me with disbelief. I cannot do this. I do not know how to clean offices. I have a degree in art history. Your degree is useless. I snapped, and your pride is expensive. You are 32 years old and you have never done a day of hard labor in your life. Well, that changes today. You said you were tricked. You said you were a victim. Prove it. Prove to me that you have some Jefferson steel in your spine. Take the job, scrub the toilets, fold the sheets, sweat for your money. Learn what a dollar actually weighs. She looked at the paper, then at her blistered feet, then at the mansion she used to rule. She was realizing that the safety net was gone. She was realizing that the bank of Dad was closed permanently. I do not raise parasites, Keisha, I said, my voice final. I raised a daughter. I thought I raised a woman of character somewhere along the way. You lost her. You traded her for a red dress and a country club membership. If you want to find her again, you will find her in the mop bucket. You will find her in the double shift. You will find her when you look in the mirror and see a woman who pays her own way. I turned away from her, signaling to the foreman to continue the work. I did not want to watch her cry anymore. I did not want to watch her beg. I had given her the greatest gift a parent can give a child. I had given her the opportunity to grow up. Daddy. She called out one last time, her voice weak. Please, I have nowhere to go. I stopped and looked back over my shoulder, looking at her kneeling on the grass, clutching the list of jobs like it was a death sentence. You have 10 places to go, Keisha, I said, pointing at the paper. Pick one, start walking, and do not come back here until you can look me in the eye and tell me you earned your dinner. I walked toward the house, entering the front door, stepping over the debris of the renovation. The smell of sawdust and fresh paint filled my nose. The smell of a new beginning. I walked to the back of the house where the patio used to be, where I had been slapped. It was gone, replaced by a foundation for a new sunroom for the residents. I stood on the wet concrete, feeling the solidity of it under my feet. Outside, I heard Keisha weeping for a few minutes, and then silence. I walked to the window and looked out. She was gone. She had stood up, she had wiped her face, and she had started walking down the driveway, limping on her injured feet, holding the piece of paper in her hand. She was heading toward the main road, heading toward the bus stop, heading toward the first day of her real life. I felt a tear run down my own cheek, hot and fast. I wiped it away angrily. I was not crying for her pain. I was crying for the time we had wasted, for the years of lies. But as I watched her disappear around the bend of the road, a small flicker of hope ignited in my chest. She was walking. She had not stayed on the grass to die. She had not called Braden. She was walking toward the work. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for her, yet maybe the concrete in her blood had not turned to water. Maybe she could still build a foundation that would hold. I turned back to the workers. All right, gentlemen, let us get this wall down, I boomed, my voice strong. I want this center open in 2 months. We have heroes waiting for a home, and we are not going to keep them waiting. The Fulton County Superior Court smells like lemon floor wax and old lies. It is a scent I know well from decades of contract disputes and zoning hearings. But today, the air was thick with something else. It was thick with the anticipation of a public execution. Braden Miller sat at the defense table wearing a cheap suit that was 2 sizes too big, likely bought by a public defender or borrowed from a bail bondsman. He looked thin, his skin pasty, from 2 months in county jail, unable to make the bail. I had ensured was set at a flight risk level. He did not look at me. He stared at the table, his hands clasped so tight his knuckles were white, praying for a miracle. That was not coming. His lawyer was a man named Sterling Thorne, a high-priced shark known for getting white-collar criminals off on technicalities. Braden must have promised him a percentage of a fortune. He still deluded himself into thinking he could win back. Thorne was slick, moving around the courtroom like a dancer trying to charm the jury, trying to paint his client as a victim of a vindictive, senile old man. Thorne walked toward the witness stand where I sat, his smile tight and predatory. He adjusted his cufflinks and looked at the jury before turning his shark eyes on me. Mr. Jefferson, Thorne began, his voice smooth as oil. We have heard a lot today about financial transactions and corporate bylaws, but let us get to the heart of the matter. You are 75 years old. Is that correct? I am, I said, my voice steady, leaning forward slightly, my hands resting on the head of my cane. And you suffer from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a condition that restricts oxygen to the brain. Isn't that right? It restricts oxygen to the lungs, I corrected him. My brain gets plenty of air. Counselor. Thorne smiled condescendingly. Of course, but lack of oxygen can cause confusion, memory loss, even hallucinations. Can it not? Have you ever forgotten where you put your keys? Mr. Jefferson, have you ever forgotten a name? I watched him weave his web. He was trying to build a narrative of incompetence. He wanted the jury to believe that I had imagined the abuse, that I had imagined the slap, that I was just a confused old man lashing out in a fog of dementia. "I have never forgotten a name that mattered," I said. Thorne paced back and forth, playing to the gallery. "Isn't it true that your son-in-law was poised to take over the company? Isn't it true that you were jealous of his youth and his modern vision? Isn't it true that you fabricated this entire story of assault because you were afraid of being replaced?" He leaned in close, invading my personal space, trying to rattle me. "Isn't it true, Mr. Jefferson, that you are simply too old to understand what happened that night?" Braden looked up, then a flicker of hope in his eyes. He nodded vigorously, encouraging his lawyer's narrative. "Yes. Tell them he is crazy. Tell them he is senile." I looked at the jury. I saw doubt creeping into their eyes. They saw an old man with a cane breathing heavily. They saw a slick lawyer with a confident smile. I knew I had to crush this narrative right now. I had to show them that while my body was weathering, my mind was still a diamond. "Your Honor," I said, turning to the judge, "may I present a piece of evidence to refute the counsel's claim of mental incompetence?" The judge frowned unusual request. "Mr. Jefferson, what is it?" I reached into the leather portfolio I had brought with me and pulled out a large rolled sheet of drafting paper. I unrolled it on the ledge of the witness box, smoothing it out. It was a complex architectural schematic drawn in blue ink, precise and detailed, covering every inch of the paper. "This," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room, "is a structural schematic for a multi-level suspension bridge utilizing a hyperstatic stress distribution system. I designed this morning between 4 and 6 a.m. while I was having my coffee." Thorne laughed nervously. "Objection, relevance, this is just a drawing." "It is not a drawing," I boomed, cutting him off. "It is a mathematical proof of sanity." I pointed to a section of the blueprint. "Look here at the load-bearing ratio of the primary cable. Stay. It requires a calculation of vector calculus involving wind shear and thermal expansion coefficients. To the third decimal point, a mind that is confused. Mr. Thorne cannot balance this equation. A mind that is hallucinating cannot visualize a three-dimensional stress test in 2 dimensions." I looked at the jury, pointing at the paper. "This design would hold 50,000 tons of steel and concrete against a Category 5 hurricane. If I were senile counselor, that bridge would collapse on paper before it was ever built. I am not confused. I am an engineer, and engineers deal in facts, not fantasies." The jury leaned forward, looking at the complex drawing, looking at the steady hand that had created it. The doubt in their eyes vanished, replaced by awe. Thorne looked at the paper, then at me, his smile faltering. He knew he had lost the competence argument. He retreated to his table, whispering furiously to Braden, who was shaking his head in panic. Thorne turned back to me, his face red, desperation making him reckless. "Very well. You can draw a bridge that does not prove you were assaulted, you claim. My client slapped you. You claim he verbally abused you, but there were no witnesses. Were there just his wife, who is not here to testify, and a room full of people who saw nothing until after the alleged fact? It is your word against his, Mr. Jefferson, and frankly a slap seems unlikely, given the size difference." Braden sat up straighter, emboldened. "Yeah," he muttered. "He is lying. No one saw it." Looked at Braden, then at Thorne. I allowed a small, cold smile to touch my lips. "You are right, counselor. Witnesses are unreliable people. Forget, people look away. People lie to protect themselves. That is why I do not rely on people. I rely on technology." I reached under my shirt collar and pulled out a small black device suspended on a chain around my neck. It was a high-fidelity digital voice recorder, the kind used by field engineers to dictate notes on noisy construction sites. I spent 40 years on job sites. "Mr. Thorne," I said, holding the device up for the jury to see on a construction site, "accidents happen. People get hurt, and then they sue. So I learned a long time ago to document everything. I turn this on when I leave my house, and I turn it off when I go to sleep. It is a habit, a safety protocol. And on the night of November 12th, it was running." The color drained from Braden's face so fast, he looked like a corpse. He started to stand up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "No," he shouted. "No, you cannot play that." "Sit down, Mr. Miller," the judge barked, slamming his gavel. "Mr. Jefferson, please proceed." I pressed the play button on the device and held it up to the microphone on the witness stand. The sound quality was pristine, amplified by the courtroom speakers. First there was the sound of jazz music, soft and expensive. Then the sound of my own voice, raspy and polite, asking for clean air. Keisha, I cannot breathe down there. The smoke is coming through the vents. Please, baby, just take it to the patio. Then, Braden's voice, clear as a bell, dripping with arrogance and cruelty. Shut up. Just shut up. You ungrateful old leech. You are living in my house. You are eating my food. You are breathing my air. The jury gasped, hearing the venom in his tone, hearing the hatred unmasked, but the recording continued, capturing the escalation, capturing the moment. Braden sealed his fate. You stink. Ice. You smell like old medicine and poverty. And then the sound that made everyone in the room flinch. The sharp, sickening crack of flesh hitting flesh. The sound of a slap delivered with full force, followed by the clatter of my cane hitting the marble floor. Get out of my sight. Go back to your hole before I throw you out on the street myself. I clicked the stop button. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, absolute. I looked at the jury. Their faces were masks of disgust and horror. They were not looking at a businessman anymore. They were looking at a monster who beat old men. They were looking at a coward. I looked at Thorne. He had closed his folder. He was not looking at the jury. He was looking at his shoes, knowing the case was dead, knowing his fee was gone, knowing he had been outmaneuvered by a man he thought was senile. And finally I looked at Braden. He was slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, sobbing quietly. He was not crying because he was sorry, he was crying because he had heard his own voice. And for the first time he realized how ugly he truly sounded. He realized that the world now knew exactly who he was. The mask was not just slipped, it was shattered. The judge looked at Braden with eyes of cold flint. Mr. Thorne, do you have any further questions for this witness? Thorne did not even look up. No, Your Honor. No further questions. I stood up slowly, retrieving my blueprint and tucking the recorder back under my shirt. I walked down from the witness stand, my cane tapping a rhythm of victory on the floor. I did not look back at Braden. He was already a memory, a structural failure that had been identified and removed. I walked out of the courtroom, leaving the jury to write the final chapter of his destruction. I had built the case brick by brick, and now the walls were closing in on him. The jury did not need long to decide the fate of a man who steals from the hand that feeds him. They were out for less than 2 hours, a lunch break, essentially before they returned with a verdict that was as heavy and final as a wrecking ball. I sat in the front row, my hands the front row, resting on the silver head of my cane, watching the door to the jury room, waiting for the structural failure of Braden Miller's life to be official. The courtroom was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system and the nervous tapping of Braden's foot against the floor. He was sweating through his cheap suit again, the fabric staining dark under the arms. The smell of his fear was palpable, a sour metallic scent that cut through the lemon polish of the benches. He looked over his shoulder, constantly looking for a savior, looking for Keisha, looking for anyone who could wake him up from this nightmare. But Keisha was not there. She was scrubbing floors somewhere in the city, learning the value of $1, and I was the only family present, the Grim Reaper sitting in the front row. All rise! The bailiff announced, his voice booming off the mahogany panels. I stood up slowly, my knees popping slightly, a reminder of 40 years on concrete floors. Judge Harrison swept into the room, her black robes billowing like storm clouds. She was a stern woman with eyes that had seen every variety of human greed, and she looked at Braden with the kind of cold appraisal a foreman gives a worker who shows up drunk on the job. She sat down, arranged her papers, and looked at the foreman of the jury. Have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor, the foreman said, a middle-aged man with calloused hands, a man who worked for a living, a man who understood exactly what kind of thief Braden was. In the matter of the state versus Braden Miller on the count of grand larceny, how do you find the defendant? Guilty on the count of wire fraud. How do you find the defendant? Guilty on the count of elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. How do you find the defendant? Guilty. The word rang out 3 times like a hammer striking an anvil. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Braden let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. His legs gave out and he collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. His lawyer, Sterling. Thorne closed his briefcase with a snap. the sound of a mercenary packing up after a lost battle. Thorne knew the check would bounce. He knew his client was finished. He did not even pat Braden on the back. He just moved his chair away slightly, distancing himself from the blast radius. Judge Harrison did not waste time with pleasantries. She did not ask for pre-sentencing reports. She did not ask for character witnesses. She had seen the evidence. She had heard the tapes. She had seen the blueprints of a bridge drawn by a man Braden claimed was senile. She knew exactly who the villain was in this story. "Mr. Miller, please stand," she ordered. Braden struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the table. His face was gray, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. He looked at the judge, shaking his head, muttering, "No, no, no," under his breath, as if denial could rewrite the law. "Braden Miller, you have been found guilty of a systematic and predatory campaign to defraud your family and your employer. Not only did you embezzle millions of dollars from Jefferson Holdings, a company built on the blood and sweat of honest men, but you conspired to strip a vulnerable senior citizen of his dignity, his assets, and his freedom. You attempted to weaponize the legal system against the very man who put a roof over your head. Your arrogance is matched only by your cruelty." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the wood of the room. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be remanded to the custody of the State Department of Corrections for a term of 15 years, with no eligibility for parole. For the first 10 years, you will also be required to pay restitution in the amount of $2.5 million to be garnered from any and all future earnings. 15 years. The sentence hung in the air like dust after an explosion. 15 years of concrete walls and steel bars. 15 years of wearing a uniform he did not choose. 15 years of being told when to eat, when to sleep, and when to speak. It was a lifetime for a man like Braden, a man who measured his worth in freedom and luxury. "No!" Braden screamed, the sound tearing out of his throat raw and primal. 15 years. You cannot do this. I am a businessman. I have a life. This is a mistake." The judge banged her gavel once, a sharp crack that signaled the end of the discussion. "Bailiffs, take him into custody." Two large officers moved in from the side of the courtroom, pulling the handcuffs from their belts, the metal clicking ominously. Braden tried to back away, knocking over his chair, scrambling backward like a crab caught in a bucket. "No, do not touch me. Do not touch me. I need to call my wife. I need to call my lawyer." "Your lawyer is right there, son," I said quietly from the gallery. But Braden did not hear me. He was too busy fighting the inevitable. The bailiffs grabbed him, spinning him around and forcing his hands behind his back. The click of the cuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest sound I had heard in years. It was the sound of a contract being fulfilled, the sound of a debt being paid. They hauled him up, pushing him toward the side door, toward the holding cells, toward the bus that would take him to his new reality. But to get to that door, they had to pass me. I was standing at the end of the aisle, leaning on my cane, blocking the path, not physically but spiritually. I was the mountain he had tried to climb and failed. Braden saw me. His eyes locked onto mine, and the fear in them turned into a white-hot rage, a hatred so pure it almost scorched the air between us. He stopped digging his heels into the carpet, forcing the bailiffs to drag him forward. "You!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth, his face contorted into a mask of ugliness. "You did this. You are a demon. You are the devil himself." I did not blink. I did not move. I just watched him thrash. "You set me up," Braden roared, straining against the cuffs, trying to lunge at me, trying to get one last hit, in trying to hurt me, one last time. You knew the whole time. You let me steal you. Let me think I was winning. You trapped me like a rat. You guy-bay me. The bailiffs shoved him forward, trying to get him past me, trying to get him out of the courtroom. "Keep walking." "Miller," one of them grunted, but Braden would not stop screaming. "You are evil, old man. You watched me drown. You could have stopped me. You could have told me, but you wanted this. You wanted to destroy me. Look at you standing there in your fancy suit, acting like you are God. You are just a vindictive old man who hates his own family." He was right in front of me now, inches away, the smell of his sweat and his terror filling my nose. He was panting, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and accusing. He wanted me to feel guilty. He wanted me to feel shame. He wanted to believe that he was the victim of a grand conspiracy, because that was easier than admitting he was just a thief. I leaned in close, closer than the bailiffs liked, but they did not stop me. They knew who I was. They knew what he had done. I leaned in until my face was next to his ear, until I could hear the rapid throb of his pulse in his neck. I spoke softly, my voice a whisper that carried the weight of 75 years of hard labor. I did not trap you, Braden. I said my words precise and cold as ice. I did not make you steal a single dime. I did not make you gamble. I did not make you lie to my daughter, and I certainly did not make you slap me in front of your friends. Braden stopped struggling for a second, his breathing hitching as he listened. I did not set a trap. Son, I continued, my voice dropping lower, intimate and terrifying. I just handed you a rope. I gave you the length you wanted. I gave you the slack you demanded, and you, Braden, you are the one who tied the noose. You are the one who stood on the chair, and you are the one who kicked it away because you were too greedy to check if the rope was tied to a branch or an anchor. You hung yourself because you thought you could fly. Braden stared at me, his eyes widening. The truth, finally piercing the armor of his narcissism. He realized in that second that he was not a victim of my malice. He was a victim of his own nature. He saw the rope around his neck, and he knew that his own hands had tied the knot. The bailiff shoved him again, harder this time, breaking the moment. Let us go. Miller, move it. They dragged him away, pulling him through the side door, his screams fading into sobbing. Begging pleas that bounced off the corridor walls until the heavy metal door slammed shut, cutting him off from the world of the living. I stood there in the silence of the courtroom, the echo of his accusations still hanging in the air. Demon he had called me. Maybe he was right. Maybe it takes a demon to catch a monster. Maybe it takes a man who has walked through the fire to know how to burn down a house without killing the people inside. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Luther. He had been standing behind me, silent and supportive the whole time. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, his voice low. I took a deep breath, adjusting my cuffs, straightening my jacket. "I am fine, Luther," I said, turning away from the door, turning away from Braden. "I am just tired. Cleaning up trash is exhausting work." We walked out of the courtroom together, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the floor. Outside, the press was waiting, cameras ready, microphones extended, hungry for a quote, hungry for the victory speech of the billionaire who took down his own family. But I had nothing to say to them. My message had been delivered in a whisper, and the only person who needed to hear it was already in a cage. I walked past the reporters, ignoring their questions, ignoring the flashes. I walked out into the bright Atlanta afternoon, the sun warm on my face, the air smelling of exhaust and freedom. Braden Miller was gone, sentenced to 15 years of hard reality. But my work was not done. I still had a daughter to save, I still had a foundation to build, and I still had a promise to keep. The rope had done its job, now it was time to build a ladder. 3 months had passed since the gavel fell and the heavy metal doors slammed shut on Braden Miller. 3 months of silence, 3 months of rebuilding. The city of Atlanta was moving into autumn, the humidity breaking the leaves, turning the color of rust and gold. But for my daughter Keisha, it was a season of winter. She was living in a world I had designed for her, a world of consequences and cold mornings. I knew where she was. I always knew. I had not turned off the tracker on her phone, but I stopped checking it every hour. I checked it once a week just to make sure she was still alive. She was living in a studio apartment in East Point, a neighborhood where the sirens are constant and the rent is cheap. It was a walk up on the 4th floor with peeling paint and a view of a dumpster. She paid for it with money. She earned scrubbing toilets. I drove past the office building where she worked late one Tuesday night just to see it for myself. She was working for a janitorial service called Spotless Solutions, the kind of company that cleans up after the white-collar workers go home. I parked the Phantom across the street in the shadows and watched through the tinted glass. I saw her in the lobby of a law firm pushing a heavy mop bucket. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun. She was wearing a blue uniform that was too big for her and rubber gloves that went up to her elbows. She looked tired. She looked thin, but she was working. She was scrubbing the marble floor with a rhythm that spoke of exhaustion but also of determination. She stopped to wipe sweat from her forehead with her forearm, and for a second I saw her look at the lawyers leaving the building, men in suits, women in heels, people she used to think were her peers. Now she was the invisible help, the person they stepped around without seeing. It was a brutal fall, but it was the only way she would ever learn how to stand up. Saturday afternoon came with a gray sky, threatening rain. I was at the site of the new Veterans Center. The former mansion on Oakwood Drive, the renovation was nearly complete. The gold fixtures were gone, replaced by sturdy brass. The marble floors were covered with non-slip surfacing. It smelled of sawdust and purpose. I was inspecting the installation of the new commercial kitchen when I saw a figure walking up the driveway. She was walking, not driving. She had taken the bus and walked the last mile from the stop. It was Keisha. She looked different. The softness was gone from her face, replaced by angles and shadows. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, clothes from a thrift store. Likely she was carrying a plastic container in her hands, holding it carefully, like it was precious cargo. She stopped at the edge of the property, looking at the house she used to think she owned, looking at the ramp where her flower beds used to be. She did not cry. She just looked, accepting the reality of the change. I walked out to meet her, leaning on my cane. The workers stopped their hammers, watching us. They knew who she was. They knew the story. Everyone knew the story by now. "Hello, Daddy," she said, her voice quiet, devoid of the entitlement that used to poison it. "Hello, Keisha," I replied, staying on the porch, keeping the distance between us, physical and emotional. "You look thin. Are you eating?" "I am eating," she said. "I buy groceries. I cook rice and beans. It is cheap," I nodded. "Rice and beans build muscle steak, builds ego. Good for you." "Why are you here, Keisha?" "I told you not to come back until you earned your dinner." She looked down at the plastic container in her hands. Her knuckles were red and chapped from the chemicals she used at work. Her fingernails were short and unpolished, the hands of a working woman. "I am not here for dinner," she said, looking up, meeting my eyes with a new kind of steadiness. "I am not here to ask for money." "Daddy, I do not want anything from you." "Then why are you here?" "Next Tuesday is Marcus Jr.'s birthday," she said. "He is turning 10. I knew that I had sent a deposit to his savings account, a trust she could not touch, but she did not know that. "He is back from Switzerland," she continued, her voice catching slightly. "He and Maya are living with me in the apartment. It is small. They sleep on bunk beds in the main room, and I sleep on the pull-out couch. It is not what they are used to. They complain a lot. They miss the horses. They miss the room service. But we are together." She took a step closer, holding out the plastic container. "I wanted to invite you," she said. "We are having a small party, just us. I bought a pizza with my tips from last week, and I made a cake." She opened the lid of the container, revealing the cake inside. It was a disaster. It was lopsided. The frosting was a garish blue, probably the cheapest tub she could find at the discount store. It was sliding off the side, and the writing on top was shaky, spelling out "Happy Birthday, Marcus" in crooked letters. It was ugly. It was messy. It looked like something a child would make. "It is chocolate," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "I made it from scratch, flour, sugar, cocoa powder. I did not use a box mix." I remembered how you used to say that box mixes taste like cardboard. So I looked up a recipe on my phone, and I baked it in the toaster oven in the apartment. It took 3 tries. The first 2 burned. This one is okay. I think I looked at the cake. I looked at the blue frosting that was melting slightly in the humidity. I remembered the cakes she used to order for the kids. Birthday parties, towering confections from French patisseries that cost $500 and tasted like air. She used to hire clowns and ponies and caterers. She used to throw money at the day to make it perfect. Now she was throwing effort at it. She was throwing time and sweat into a toaster oven cake. I looked at her hands again, the burns on her fingers from the oven, the calluses from the mop. "You baked this?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Yes," she said. "I wanted him to have a cake, and I could not afford a bakery one, so I made it." I reached out and took the container. It was heavier than it looked. "Why bring it to me?" I asked. "It is his birthday." "I made 2, she said softly. "One for him and this small one for you. I wanted you to taste it. I wanted you to know that I am trying. Daddy, I am really trying. I work 6 days a week. I clean up other people's mess. I scrub toilets used by men who remind me of Braden, and I do not say a word. I just clean it because I have to feed my kids. I am not asking you to save me anymore. I just wanted to ask if you would come just for an hour to eat a slice of pizza and see your grandson. He misses you. He asks about you. He does not understand why we live in a shoebox now, but he understands that you are not there." I looked at the cake, then back at the house, the center for veterans men who had sacrificed everything and asked for nothing. Keisha was starting to understand sacrifice. She was starting to understand that love is an action, not a purchase. I cannot promise anything. "Keisha," I said, closing the lid of the container carefully. "I am a busy man. I have a lot of work to do here." "I know," she said, her shoulders slumping slightly, disappointment clouding her face, but she did not argue. She did not beg. She did not throw a tantrum like the old Keisha would have done. She just nodded, accepting my answer, accepting the boundary. "Okay," she said. Well, the address is on the lid. If you change your mind, we will be there around 6 o'clock after my shift ends." She turned to go, walking back down the driveway, her cheap sneakers crunching on the gravel. She walked with a different gait, now, less of a strut, more of a trudge, the walk of someone who carries a heavy load. But she was carrying it. She was not looking for someone to carry it for her. "Keisha!" I called out. She stopped and turned around, hope flaring in her eyes just for a second. "Your mother would have liked the blue frosting." I said it was her favorite color. Keisha smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, cracking the mask of exhaustion. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. And then she turned and kept walking, heading back to the bus stop, heading back to her cleaning job, heading back to her life. I stood on the porch holding the plastic container. I walked inside the unfinished house and sat on a sawhorse in what used to be the dining room. I opened the lid again and stuck my finger into the frosting. It was too sweet, gritty with undissolved sugar, and the cake underneath was a little dry, but it tasted like effort. It tasted like an apology. I ate a piece right there in the empty room, the crumbs falling onto my suit jacket. It was the worst cake I had ever eaten, and it was the best thing Keisha had ever given me because she made it with her own hands, because it cost her something real, not money, but time and care. But I did not go to the party. Not that Tuesday. Trust is like concrete. It takes time to cure. If you put weight on it too soon, it cracks and crumbles. Keisha was pouring a new foundation, but it was still wet. I needed to see if it would hold when the weather got bad. I needed to see if she would keep working when I did not show up with a check. I needed to know if she was doing this for me or for herself. I sat in my car that Tuesday night, parked down the street from her apartment building, watching the window on the 4th floor. I saw the silhouette of my grandson blowing out candles. I saw Keisha hugging him. I saw them eating pizza out of the box. They were laughing, they were together, and they were doing it without my money. I signaled Marcus to drive away. I did not go up. I did not send a gift. I let them have their moment. I let Keisha be the provider. I let her be the parent she needed to be. She needed to know she could do it alone. She needed to know she could survive without the Jefferson millions. Because one day I would be gone and all she would have left was the steel in her spine. I went home to my quiet house and I looked at the picture of Beatrice. She is trying be. I said to the empty room she baked a cake. It was terrible, but she baked it. I knew the road ahead was still long. Keisha had years of damage to undo. She had debts to pay, not financial ones but emotional ones. She had to earn back the respect she had thrown away with a smirk. But as I wiped the blue frosting from my lip, I felt a lightness in my chest I had not felt in a long time. The air was clearing, the smoke was gone, and for the first time in years I could breathe. I could wait. I had time, and Keisha, she had work to do, and that was the greatest gift of all. The ink was barely dry on the closing documents when the bulldozers arrived at 1402 Oakwood Drive. The new owners, a developer from Chicago, did not want the house. They wanted the land, they wanted the zip code. They did not care about the marble floors or the gold leaf columns. Braden had loved so much. They saw it for what it was, a structure built on vanity and bad debts. I stood by the gate, leaning on my silver-headed cane, watching the first wall crumble under the weight of the excavator bucket. The sound was a heavy crunch, a release of tension that had been building for years. Dust rose into the air. But for the first time in a long time, I did not cough. The dust was clean. It was the dust of demolition, clearing the way for something better. I did not feel sad watching the mansion fall. I felt light. I felt unburdened. That house had been a prison disguised as a palace. It had trapped my daughter in a fantasy, and it had trapped me in a basement. Now it was just rubble, and I was a free man. I took the check for the sale, $4.5 million, and I did not put it in my bank account. I did not buy a yacht. I did not buy a private island. I handed it directly to Luther, who was standing beside me holding a briefcase that looked heavier than usual. Put it in the fund. Luther, I said, watching the roof of the mansion cave in, every cent of it. The Jefferson Engineering Initiative is going to expand. We are going to open 3 new chapters in Detroit and Chicago, and right here in Atlanta. I want to find every kid who has a mind for math and hands for work, but who thinks college is for other people. I want to find the kids who are told they are not smart enough or rich enough, and I want to give them a hard hat and a future. I want to build an army of engineers who look like me, and who know that the only thing that matters is the strength of the foundation, not the color of the architect. Luther nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "It is done, sir," he said. "The board has already approved the expansion. We have 300 applications waiting for review." "Good," I said, turning my back on the dust cloud. "Let us get to work." 6 months later, I was sitting on a wooden rocking chair that creaked with a familiar comfort, listening to the water lap against the shore of Lake Lanier. The air here was different. It smelled of pine needles and damp earth and freedom. There was no cigar smoke. There was no perfume masking the scent of betrayal. Just the clean, honest smell of nature. I had bought this cabin 20 years ago. Beatrice and I used to come here on weekends before the company got too big, before the money got too complicated. We used to talk about retiring here, about sitting on this porch and watching the sun go down over the water. She never made it back here. She died in a hospital room in the city, surrounded by machines. But I was here, and in a way she was too. I could feel her in the breeze. I could hear her laugh in the rustle of the trees. I was not alone. The cabin was small, but the property was large, and today it was full of life. 3 young men and 2 young women were sitting around the picnic table down by the dock. They had laptops open and blueprints spread out, held down by rocks to keep them from blowing away. They were my scholars, the first recipients of the new Jefferson grants. They were brilliant, they were hungry, and they treated me not like an old ATM machine, but like a mentor. Mr. Jefferson, one of them, Jefferson one, called out a young man named Dante who reminded me of myself at 20. "Hey, Mr. Jefferson, come look at this load-bearing calculation for the cantilever. I think I found a way to reduce the steel requirement by 15%. I stood up, leaving the cane by the chair. I did not need it as much these days. My lungs were clearer, my legs were stronger. Walking away from the toxicity of my family had been the best medicine I ever took. I walked down to the dock, looking over Dante's shoulder, looking at the math, looking at the future. "You missed the wind shear factor on the upper deck, son," I said, pointing a calloused finger at the screen. "Recalculate for a Category 4 storm. Always build for the disaster, not for the sunny day." Dante frowned, then his eyes widened. "Oh, I see it, right? Snap factor. Thank you, sir." I patted him on the shoulder, feeling the solid muscle under his shirt, feeling the potential. These kids were my legacy. Braden had tried to steal my money, but he could never steal this. He never steal the knowledge I was passing down, the spark of creation that happens when an idea becomes a structure. I spent the afternoon with them, arguing about tensile strength and concrete mixtures, drinking iced tea and laughing. Real laughter, deep from the belly laughter that did not hurt my chest when the sun began to dip. Low painting the lake in shades of orange and purple, they packed up their gear, promising to return next weekend with better numbers. I walked back up to the porch alone, but not lonely. Solitude is different from loneliness. Solitude is a choice. Loneliness is a sentence. I had served my sentence in the basement. Now I was choosing my peace. I sat back down in the rocker and pulled my phone from my pocket. It was a simple smartphone, not the satellite brick I used for business. I opened the photo gallery, but I did not look at pictures of buildings. I looked at the folder labeled K. There were new photos sent to me by the private investigator who still kept a discreet watch over East Point, not to interfere, just to witness. The first photo showed Keisha leaving the office building where she worked. It was raining and she was holding a newspaper over her head. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped under the weight of her backpack, but she was moving fast with purpose. She was not looking for a taxi. She was walking toward the subway station, saving the fare. The second photo was of her in the grocery store. She was comparing the prices of 2 jars of peanut butter. She chose the store brand, the cheaper one, putting the name brand back on the shelf. I zoomed in on her face. She was not frowning. She was calculating. She was budgeting. She was being responsible. She looked older. The lines around her mouth were deeper, but her eyes were clear. The fog of entitlement was gone, replaced by the clarity of survival. The third photo was the one that made me pause. It was taken through the window of a laundromat. Keisha was sitting on a plastic chair reading a textbook while the dryers spun behind her. She was taking night classes online, studying business administration. She was not just scrubbing floors. She was building a ladder. She was trying to climb out of the hole the right way. I felt a swelling in my chest, a mixture of pride and pain. I wanted to drive down there. I wanted to hand her a check for $1 million and say, "Good job, baby girl. You learned the lesson." Come home, but I knew I could not if I saved her. Now I would rob her of the victory she was fighting for. She needed to finish the climb, she needed to reach the top of the mountain and know that her own legs carried her there. But the climb is hard, and even the strongest climber needs a foothold. Sometimes. I swiped to my Messages app and opened a contact saved, simply as Landlord East Point. I typed a message, my thumbs moving slowly over the glass. "How is the tenant in 4B?" The reply came back almost instantly. "She is good. Mr. Jefferson. Quiet. Pays on time. Mostly. She was 2 days late last month, but she made it up with the late fee. She is a hard worker." I looked at the photo of Keisha reading in the laundromat. I looked at her tired eyes. I looked at the cheap peanut butter in her bag. She was walking the wire without a net, and she was not falling. I typed another message. "I am sending a wire transfer today. It will cover the rent for apartment 4B for the next 6 months. Do not tell her it came from me. Tell her it is a credit. Tell her it is a clerical error. Tell her it is a grant for single mothers. I do not care what you tell her. Just tell her the rent is paid and she has some breathing room." I hit send and watched the little bubble disappear into the ether, delivering a silent blessing, a secret safety net that would let her sleep a little easier tonight. The landlord replied, "Understood, sir. You are a good man." I put the phone down on the table, face down. I was not a good man. I was a father, and fathers do what is necessary. Sometimes that means being the villain who kicks you out, and sometimes that means being the ghost who pays your rent. I looked out at the lake, the water turning dark as the night came on. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, clean air. I thought about Braden sitting in a cell, wondering where it all went wrong. I thought about the board of directors scrambling to fix the damage he had caused. I thought about the house that was gone and the home that was rising in its place, and I thought about Keisha sitting in her small apartment, maybe eating a peanut butter sandwich, maybe studying for her exam, not knowing that for the next 6 months she could buy the name brand jar if she wanted to. I closed my eyes and rocked back and forth, the chair creaking a lullaby. "Beatrice?" I whispered into the night. "She is going to make it. She is tough. She is a Jefferson. She just needed to be reminded." I sat there until the stars came out, pointing points of light in the vast darkness. I was 75 years old. I had lost a fortune and gained a soul. I had lost a son-in-law and found a mission. I had broken my family to save it, and sitting there in the quiet of the cabin, I knew that for the first time in a long time the foundation was solid. The concrete had cured and the structure would hold. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the porch of the cabin. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles, a sharp contrast to the stale, recycled air of the courtroom or the suffocating smoke of the basement where I had spent a year of my life. I sat in my rocking chair, a mug of black coffee in my hand, watching the mist rise off the surface of the lake. It was a quiet morning, the kind of quiet you have to earn, the kind of quiet that comes after the noise of battle has finally faded away. I was 75 years old, and for the first time in a decade I felt truly rested. My chest did not ache. My breath came easy, and the silence around me was not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of peace. I thought about the last few months, about the whirlwind of destruction and reconstruction I had unleashed. I thought about the look on Braden's face when the bailiffs dragged him away, the realization in his eyes that he had been playing checkers while I was playing three-dimensional chess. He had mistaken noise for power. He thought that because he shouted, because he slapped, because he demanded that he was in control. He did not understand that true power does not need to raise its voice. True power is the ability to change the landscape without saying a word. It is the ability to sign a document that freezes a fortune. It is the ability to open a door that was locked or close a door that was open. It is the quiet strength to endure humiliation, knowing that you hold the thunderbolt in your pocket, waiting for the right moment to throw it. Braden had measured power in horsepower and square footage. He thought a Porsche made him a man. He thought a mansion made him a king. But the Porsche was just metal and plastic, and the mansion was just wood and stone. Things that could be taken away by the stroke of a pen. He never understood that the real foundation of power is character. It is the things you cannot buy and the things you cannot steal. It is integrity, it is patience, and it is the willingness to walk away from everything if it means keeping your soul. I took a sip of coffee, the bitter warmth spreading through my chest. I thought about Keisha. She was waking up in her small apartment right now, maybe making breakfast for my grandchildren. maybe getting ready for another shift at the cleaning company. She was tired. I knew that she was scared. I knew that too, but she was free. She was free of the lie she had been living. She was free of the husband who saw her as an accessory. She was free of the delusion that the world owed her a living. She was learning that dignity is not found in a designer label, but in the calluses on your hands and the ache in your back after an honest day's work. I had broken her heart. Yes, I had stripped her of her comfort, but I had given her back her life. I had given her the chance to be the woman her mother knew she could be. I stood up the rocker creaking behind me and walked down the steps of the porch. I walked to the small detached garage at the edge of the property, the gravel crunching under my boots. I unlocked the side door and stepped into the cool, dim interior. The smell of oil and rubber greeted me. A smell that reminded me of my youth, of the days before the billions, when I was just a man with a tool belt and a dream. In the center of the garage, covered by a heavy canvas tarp, sat the Rolls-Royce Phantom, the machine of vengeance, the chariot of the king. I walked over to it and lifted the corner of the tarp, revealing the sleek black fender. It was a beautiful car, a masterpiece of engineering, but it was not me. It was a costume I had worn to play a role. It was the armor I needed to fight a dragon, but the dragon was slain, and the armor was heavy. I let the tarp fall back into place, covering the shine, covering the power. I would not drive it again, not for a long time, maybe never. It would sit here in the dark, a sleeping beast waiting for a day that I hoped would never come again. I did not need to be the king anymore. I just needed to be Isaiah. I walked past the Phantom to the back of the garage where an old bicycle leaned against the wall. It was a Schwinn 50 years old, the paint scratched and faded, the chrome pitted with rust, but the tires were new and the chain was oiled. I ran my hand over the handlebars, feeling the familiar metal. This was my reality. This was the speed at which I wanted to live. I wheeled the bike out into the sunlight, the metal gleaming dully in the morning light. I swung my leg over the seat, feeling the balance, feeling the connection to the ground. I did not need a chauffeur. I did not need a security detail. I just needed my own legs and the will to move forward. I started to pedal, the chain clicking, softly the tires humming on the pavement. I rode down the driveway, past the gate, past the property line, out onto the country road that wound around the lake. The wind hit my face, cool and clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs, feeling them expand without pain, without restriction. As I rode, I thought about the legacy I was leaving. It was not the buildings in the city. It was not the bridges or the highways. Those were just things that would eventually crumble and turn to dust. My true legacy was the lesson I had taught my family, the lesson that cost $2.5 million in a year of my life. I had taught them that you cannot build a life on a foundation of lies. I had taught them that respect is not a transaction, it is a requirement. I had taught them that the hand that feeds you can also be the hand that starves you if you bite it. But more importantly, I had taught myself something. I had learned that love does not mean enabling. I had learned that protecting someone sometimes means letting them fall. I had learned that it is never too late to take back your dignity. It is never too late to rewrite the contract of your life. I pedaled harder, feeling the burn in my thighs, feeling the blood pumping through my veins. I was 75 years old, but I felt young. I felt light. I had shed the weight of my secret. I had shed the weight of my disappointment. I was just a man on a bicycle riding down a road, enjoying the morning. I passed a neighbor, a man I did not know, walking his dog. He waved at me. "Morning," he called out. "Morning," I called back, my voice strong and clear. He did not know who I was. He did not know I was a billionaire. He did not know I had destroyed a man's life and saved a woman's soul. He just saw an old man on a bike enjoying the day, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I rounded a curve in the road, and the lake opened up before me, a vast expanse of blue reflecting the sky. It was deep, it was calm, it was enduring. It had been here long before I was born, and it would be here long after I was gone. It did not care about money, it did not care about status, it just existed, holding its depth in silence. I stopped the bike and put my foot down, looking at the water. I thought about Beatrice. "I hope you are proud of me, Bea," I whispered. "I hope I did right by our girl." I felt a sudden breeze, a gentle touch against my cheek, and I knew she understood that sometimes you have to burn the field to save the harvest. I turned the bike around and started heading back toward the cabin, back toward my quiet life. I had a meeting next week with the scholarship committee. I had plans to review for the new wing of the Veterans Center. I had work to do, good work, meaningful work, work that built things up instead of tearing them down. But for now, I was just going to ride. I was going to feel the sun on my face and be grateful for the air in my lungs. I was Isaiah Jefferson, I was a father, I was a builder, and I was finally free. True power is not about how loud you can shout or how hard you can strike. It is about the quiet strength to endure and the wisdom to act when the time is right. People often mistake silence for weakness and humility for poverty, only to find themselves shattered when the truth is revealed. Never judge a book by its worn cover, nor a man by his silence. The foundation you disrespect today could be the very ground that swallows you whole tomorrow. Respect is not a transaction. It is the currency of humanity. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.